Chapter 359. Not long after Ji Yaoshua left, Su Zimo was repairing the formation near the cave abode, when the night spirit escorted Xiaoning over. "What's wrong?" Su Zimo asked when he saw that Xiaoning was hesitant to speak, as though she had something on her mind. Hesitating for a moment, Su Xiaoning took out an ancient and exquisite elixir furnace and frowned. "Brother, I don't know why, but this elixir furnace has been heating up ever since we entered the ancient battlefield." Su Zimo took over the elixir furnace and sensed it. Sure enough, this alchemy furnace was emitting a trace of warmth, but it was not obvious. This elixir furnace was the source of the conflict between the Su Zimo siblings and True Fire sect in the capital of Great Zhou. Ever since Xiaoning obtained this elixir furnace, it was easier for her to focus her mental energy, and her elixir refinement state would reach its peak as long as she had it with her. At that time, Su Zimo already felt that this elixir furnace had a great background. Now, it seemed like there was a high chance that this elixir furnace had something to do with the ancient battlefield. Su Zimo returned the elixir furnace to Xiaoning and asked, "Apart from the heat, do you have any other strange feelings?" "Strange feelings?" Su Xiaoning pondered for a moment before saying, "I haven't been sleeping well the past few days. It's as though I can feel an inexplicable calling. It's faintly discernible. Does that count?" Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he asked, "Can you sense the direction of that calling?" "That way." Su Xiaoning pointed to the south with a firm tone. Su Zimo nodded and had a plan in mind. Since he had already decided to check out the depths of the ancient battlefield, he might as well head in the direction that Xiaoning pointed out and see if he could unravel the secret of this ancient elixir furnace. For the next 10 days or so, after Su Zimo repaired the formation outside the cave abode, he stayed alone in the final stone chamber for a few more days before calling everyone to the main hall of the cave abode. "I intend to leave this place and check out the depths of the ancient battlefield." After Su Zimo said this, his eyes inadvertently swept over Jun Hao. The latter was expressionless, and no one could tell if he was happy or angry. Ji Yaoshua and Su Xiaoning already knew about this. Naturally, they did not have any reaction, but the others had different expressions. Si Yutong was the first to jump out and object. "I'm definitely not going. Before we entered the ancient battlefield, all the seniors warned us not to go too deep into the battlefield. If you're courting death, I won't accompany you. Mr. Mo, this place is treacherous and protected by the array. We've already obtained the meridian unlocking elixir. We can just cultivate in seclusion here. There's no need to risk venturing deep into the ancient battlefield." A great Zhou guard frowned and shook his head in denial. "Brother Zimo is very powerful. Even if you enter the depths of the ancient battlefield, you will be able to protect yourself." Jun Hao stood out and sighed regretfully. "It's a pity that my strength is limited and I can't travel alongside you, Brother Zimo." Su Zimo looked at Jun Hao with a fake smile. Without saying anything, he looked at the other cultivators. Ji Chengtian said in a deep voice, "Zimo, I'll go with you." "Bro, I'll go too." Little Fatty stood out hurriedly. Leng Ro nodded to Su Zimo as well. Shi Jian scratched his head and smiled foolishly. "I'll go with you guys as well." Another great Zhou guard frowned and said with a stern expression, "Everyone, you have to think carefully. The depths of the ancient battlefield are much more dangerous than the borders. Every step is filled with danger, and there's only a slim chance of survival. 6 Meridian Foundation establishment is the lowest cultivation in the depths of the ancient battlefield." Another person said, "That's right. If you encounter the successors of top factions, they can kill all of you single-handedly. For the past thousands of years, none of the cultivators who ventured deep into the ancient battlefield returned alive." Su Zimo cupped his fists. "I've already made up my mind. Thank you for your reminder, fellow Taoists." In reality, everyone from Misty Peak knew that the deeper they ventured into the ancient battlefield, the more dangerous it would be. However, opportunities coexisted with danger. Furthermore, for Ji Chengtian and the others, there was something more important. Before entering the ancient battlefield, the 2 peak masters, Xianyi and Lu Hui, hinted to them that they had to find other passageways in the ancient battlefield to leave the Great Zhou dynasty and Tianhuang mainland's north region. Before long, Ji Chengtan, Leng Ro, Little Fatty, Xiaoning, Shi Jian and Night Spirit arrived behind Su Zimo. Out of the 11 of them, only Ji Yaoshua and the 2 great Zhou guards, Jun Hao and Si Yutong, were left. I've already repaired the formation outside. This stone chamber is sufficient. You guys can cultivate separately. Su Zimo looked deeply at Ji Yaoshua before leaving with Xiaoning and the others. After sending Su Zimo and the others off, Ji Yaoshua was a little disappointed and said indifferently, "From today onwards, I'll be cultivating in seclusion. Nobody is allowed to enter my cultivation chamber." With that, Ji Yaoshua walked towards the stone chamber at the end of the 5th passageway. There were 5 stone chambers here. Si Yutong shrugged his shoulders and chose a random one to begin his long cultivation as well. Jun Hao looked at Ji Yaoshua's departing back view with a cold glint in his eyes and his lips curled. After leaving this place, Su Zimo took out a map and compared it to the map before leading everyone south. With Su Zimo and Night Spirit around, the journey south was more daunting than dangerous. However, as they ventured deeper into the ancient battlefield, even Su Zimo was starting to feel some pressure. The ferocious beasts they encountered along the way were getting stronger, and they were even ambushed by other cultivators. Apart from Su Zimo, almost everyone else was injured. Although they were all at the same cultivation realm, the 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators they encountered in the depths of the ancient battlefield were much stronger than those at the borders. Even Ji Changtian, who possessed the 3 great secret skills of Misty Peak, was suppressed in a one-on-one fight. As for Su Zimo, the pressure on him was increasing as well. At the borders of the ancient battlefield, he could still ensure the safety of the 6 of them, but now he could only protect 1 or 2 of them at most. For the past 10 days, everyone was on the move and did not have any time to cultivate. Although their cultivation realms were the same as before, Ji Changtian and the others had clearly grown in strength after the 10 days of intense battles where they were on the brink of death multiple times. This was a transformation that could not be achieved through seclusion cultivation. 10 days later, when evening approached, an ancient city appeared on the horizon ahead. It was as if an ancient giant beast was crouching there. It was a gathering point marked on the map, Xintian City. All the cities that remained from the primordial battlefield were the largest gathering points. Cultivators from all sorts of factions and sects would gather in these places. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. They had been on the road for 10 days straight and were extremely tense. Other than Su Zimo, who was still energetic and did not look tired, the others were injured and were already at their limits. If they could not find a place to rest before nightfall, it would be an extremely difficult night for them. Along the way, Ji Changtian and the others looked at Su Zimo with increasing curiosity and respect. Be it at the borders of the ancient battlefield or in the depths, no one could tell where Su Zimo's limits were. That seemingly frail body seemed to contain an endless amount of power. His physical strength was vigorous, and his endurance was astonishing. All of them knew that if not for Su Zimo, they would have died on the way before they could even see Xintian City. Chapter 360. North Gate of Xintian City. It was getting late and there were no cultivators entering or exiting the city gates. Those who dared to leave the city at this hour were either lunatics who did not know what was good for them or peerless experts who were confident in their cultivation. By the time Su Zimo's group arrived at the city gates, 2 cultivators were pushing the city gates and the thick stone gates creaked as they closed slowly. "Fellow Taoists, please wait for a moment," Su Zimo shouted hurriedly. If he wanted to enter the city, Su Zimo could definitely charge in before the city gates closed with ethereal wings or the burst of divine steed fleeting. However, the same could not be said for Ji Changtian and the others. The few of them were exhausted and covered in injuries after rushing the entire way. How could they have the strength to charge forward? The moment Su Zimo said that, the stone gates paused for a moment. The 2 cultivators at the city gates looked towards Su Zimo and frowned slightly. In their eyes, the 6 of them looked like they had been through a lot. Apart from the green-robed cultivator in the lead who looked normal, the others looked wretched. Furthermore, Su Zimo and the others did not have any sect badges or anything that could reveal their identities. In the ancient battlefield, the successors and disciples of the top factions of Tianhuang mainland would naturally not hide their identities. Most of the time, those people could do whatever they wanted and save a lot of trouble by flashing their identity badges. For people like Su Zimo and the others who did not have any identity information, they were either itinerant cultivators or disciples of ordinary sects and factions. The 2 cultivators guarding the gates had seen plenty of such people. The two of them exchanged glances and sneered internally. They pretended not to hear and continued pushing the stone gate slowly towards the middle. All of a sudden, the sound of clothes fluttering could be heard and the wind howled. It was as though a tsunami was surging and arrived before them in the blink of an eye. Instinctively, the two of them looked up and their pupils constricted. Unknowingly, the green-robed cultivator who was initially far away had already arrived at the city gates. He opened his arms and pressed his palms on both sides of the stone gates. No matter how much strength the two of them exerted, the stone gates did not budge at all. The green-robed cultivator's palms seemed to contain immense strength as he stood tall like an unshakable divine being. Standing at the city gates, he glared at the two of them coldly with a burning gaze. "You." The two cultivators swallowed their saliva as panic flashed through their eyes. "Why did you close the door?" Suzimo asked slowly. His voice was bone-chilling. Shutting them out before nightfall was no different from killing them. In the dark night, Suzimo could only barely protect himself against the endless ferocious beasts and ancient living beings. Everyone else was doomed. "What are you doing?" one of them asked fiercely. Suzimo didn't answer. With a shake of his arms, the two stone doors rumbled and shook violently, causing dust to fall. The expressions of the two cultivators changed and they felt their arms go numb. They subconsciously let go and staggered back a few steps, almost falling to the ground. "How dare you!" The two of them hollered and hurriedly withdrew their flying swords from their storage bags, looking at Suzimo warily, ready to strike at any moment. Suzimo's expression remained unchanged as he clenched his fists slightly. In that short period of time, Jichengtan and the others finally arrived at the city gates, panting and pale. "Zimo, forget it. We've just arrived at Xintian City and know nothing about this place. It's better not to cause trouble. Furthermore, we're already in the city, so it doesn't matter anymore." After this period of interaction, Jichengtian and the others had a better understanding of Suzimo's personality. Xintian City was a chaotic place with countless top experts and powerful factions hidden within. Jichengtian was worried that Suzimo would bring death upon himself by standing up for them. Suzimo nodded and glanced at the two cultivators guarding the gate indifferently. Their hearts skipped a beat. They could sense a sinister killing intent in Suzimo's gaze. It was savage and violent. This is someone who can go berserk at any moment without any reservations. The same thought flashed through their minds at the same time. They watched as Suzimo and the others left the city without daring to stop them. Throughout the entire process, Jichengtian and the others were tense as well, afraid that something unexpected would happen. It was only when they walked past the two cultivators guarding the gate in silence that Jichengtian and the others heaved a sigh of relief. There were many cultivators in Xintian City, and there were many ancient buildings and residences on both sides of the streets that were occupied by many cultivators. Suzimo's group of 6 entered the city and attracted the gazes of many cultivators. "There's a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator among the 6 of them? I wonder how they managed to make it to Xintian City alive. It's useless even if they enter the city. I'm guessing that the 6 of them won't live for more than 3 days. Xintian City isn't a good place either. Without strong backing, they'll only be meat on the chopping block." As some of the cultivators discussed, more than 10 cultivators walked down from the city walls. Their leader was a burly man with a ferocious face. His robes were unbuttoned, revealing his hairy chest with a ferocious gaze. "It's already past 5 and you're still not closing the city gates? Are the two of you tired of living?" The burly cultivator's voice was hoarse and filled with the aura of a bandit. At that moment, Suzimo's group had not gone far. When they heard that voice, the expressions of Jichengtian and the others changed slightly as their hearts sank. When a cultivator saw that, he shook his head and pursed his lips, smiling. "There's no need for 3 days. The 6 of them won't be able to escape now that that person has appeared." "That's right. They've traveled a long way and are injured all over. They're like fat lambs waiting to be slaughtered. There's no way that person will let them off." "Who is that person?" someone asked. "A capable subordinate of the 4 mounted bandits, Cho Wanli. Although he's at 6 Meridian Foundation establishment, he's extremely strong in martial arts. He's bloodthirsty and vengeful. Not many people are willing to offend him at the north gate of Xintian City. For mounted bandits, Pust. Hearing these words, the expressions of many cultivators changed. They hurriedly shut their mouths and secretly sucked in a breath of cold air. At the city gates, the two cultivators guarding the gates shuddered in fear and pointed at the backs of Su Zimo's group hurriedly. It's them. We were about to close the city gates, but those 6 people barged in. Cho Wanli turned around and looked at the departing figures of Su Zimo's group. His expression changed and a ferocious look flashed through his eyes. Everyone else could tell that Su Zimo's group was weak, and naturally, Cho Wanli could not hide it from his experienced eyes. A single look was all it took for him to discern the strength of those people. The 6 of you in front, stop right there. Cho Wanli hollered and led more than 10 cultivators towards Su Zimo's group with a murderous aura. Ji Chengtian and the others sighed internally and had no choice but to stop in their tracks and turn around. Initially, Su Zimo was walking at the front. However, by the time they turned around, Su Zimo was already standing behind everyone. Su Zimo was about to head forward when Ji Chengtian stopped him and whispered, "Zimo, don't be rash. Let's see what that person wants. It's best if we don't fight if we can." That's right, bro. Judging from the expressions of the surrounding cultivators, that person seems to have a strong background. Let's not fight him head on, little fatty whispered with sweat on his forehead. Chapter 361. Cho Wanli had a ferocious expression as he held a wine jar in his left hand and a single saber in his right. The saber was snow-white and gave off a cold aura. Cho Wanli walked over with more than 10 cultivators in a menacing manner. "I'm Ji Chengtian. Fellow Taoist, may I know what you have in mind?" Ji Chengtian cupped his fists first and nodded with a smile. If they were in Tianhuang mainland, it would be difficult to get into a conflict with someone as courteous as Ji Chengtian without any deep grudges or conflicts of interest. However, that was in Tianhuang mainland. This was the ancient battlefield. The people they were facing were not good people either. Humans were harmless, but tigers were malicious. "Ji Chengtian?" Cho Wanli raised his brow and asked with a fake smile, "What's your cultivation realm?" 6 Meridian Foundation Establishment. Ji Chengtian hesitated for a moment and did not hide it. "What about you guys?" Cho Wanli then looked at Su Zimo and the others and said nonchalantly, "This is the rule of Xintian City. If you want to enter, you have to report your cultivation realm truthfully without hiding anything." When they heard that, the cultivators in Xintian City had strange expressions. There was no such rule in the city. The most likely reason why Cho Wanli said that was to test the strength of Su Zimo and the others. After all, it was impossible to tell how many spirit meridians a Foundation Establishment cultivator had unlocked with the spirit-peering art. Although Cho Wanli seemed rash, he was experienced and knew that cultivators who could come to Xintian City were not simple. He was afraid of hitting a wall. Su Zimo frowned at the rule that Cho Wanli mentioned. Although Little Fatty and the others were conflicted, they still said it honestly. 5 Meridian Foundation Establishment for Meridian Foundation Establishment. There were even late-stage Foundation Establishment cultivators. By the time the last person, Su Zimo, was done, the surrounding cultivators shook their heads. How dare they enter the ancient battlefield with such strength? They really don't know what's good for them. That's right. How many cultivators are at 5 Meridian Foundation Establishment in Xintian City? Any one of these cultivators would be enough to wipe them out in one fell swoop. Cho Wanli was completely relaxed as well. Drinking a mouthful of strong alcohol, he burped and the stench of alcohol sprayed onto Ji Chengtian's face. Ji Chengtian's expression was terrible. However, he heaved a long sigh and endured it. Cho Wanli chuckled and asked, "It's been a month since we entered the ancient battlefield. Have you guys obtained any meridian unlocking elixirs?" Ji Chengtian shook his head without hesitation. No. In reality, each of them had a meridian unlocking elixir in their storage bags. But if he were to admit it now, he would definitely be killed. "Very good." Cho Wanli nodded and said expressionlessly, "Hand over your storage bags. I want to check them myself." Upon hearing this, even Little Fatty and the others were enraged, let alone Ji Chengtian. This was blatant bullying. Su Zimo remained silent and watched coldly from behind Ji Chengtian. Ji Chengtian took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoist, isn't your request a little too much?" "Too much?" Before Ji Chengtian could finish, Cho Wanli asked with a grin. Before he finished his sentence, Cho Wanli's eyes shone coldly. With a twist of the saber in his hands, the sharp blade sliced towards Ji Chengtian's neck at an extremely fast speed. That slash was without warning and was filled with killing intent. After the month of training, Ji Chengtian had already grown a lot, and his wariness had increased as well. Earlier on, he vaguely sensed Cho Wanli's killing intent. However, he was already mentally and physically exhausted along the way and was in a bad state. As such, his reaction was slightly slower. His skin was already stinging from the incoming blade. Ji Chengtian could almost see his throat being sliced and could not help but sigh internally. "It's over for me." Before he could finish his thought, Ji Chengtian suddenly felt a tremendous force pulling him back. The tip of Cho Wanli's saber brushed past Ji Chengtian's throat and sliced through his flesh, causing blood to seep out. It was a close shave. If Ji Chengtian had been slightly slower, that slash would have sliced his throat. After surviving the calamity, Ji Chengtian was so scared that he broke out in cold sweat and panted heavily. Looking at Su Zimo beside him, Ji Chengtian was about to thank him when his vision blurred. A figure flashed by and Su Zimo had already vanished. Boom! Su Zimo reached out and pulled Ji Chengtian back from the brink of death. Without a second word, he took a step forward and executed the stance of plow heaven stride. Instantly, the limestone beneath his feet exploded and the ground quaked. The buildings on both sides of the street shook, causing countless cultivators to exclaim. With a sharp gaze, Su Zimo reached out with his palm and spread his fingers, enveloping Cho Wanli's head as though he could blot out the skies. Before Cho Wanli could react after his slash missed, he saw a person flash out from behind Ji Chengtian with a domineering aura and a killing move. Su Zimo's gigantic palm enveloped over with a suppressive aura and Cho Wanli even felt suffocated. Cho Wanli did not have time to think and before his move was over, he slashed in reverse towards Su Zimo's wrist. The blade trembled and shone with 3 spirit lights. That was a superior grade spirit saber. But now, Su Zimo's physique was so strong that it was way too difficult for ordinary superior grade spirit weapons to hurt him. Against Cho Wanli's spirit saber, Su Zimo did not change his stance and grabbed the spirit saber with his bare hands. With a twist and a shake, he snatched the spirit saber back. Su Zimo closed in and gripped the spirit saber in his hands tightly, stabbing in reverse. Exclamation point! Blood flashed and a blood-stained spirit saber protruded from the back of Cho Wanli's head. As the two of them intersected, Cho Wanli's head was pierced and he died on the spot. Su Zimo had long noticed that Cho Wanli was not a kind person and was extremely evil. That was the reason why he used a killing move right from the start without any intention of holding back. After killing Cho Wanli with a single slash, Su Zimo shifted sideways and cut into the embrace of another cultivator, leaning close to him. The moment that person placed his hand on his storage bag, his vision turned black and he felt a sharp pain in his chest. His body flew uncontrollably and he lost consciousness completely. Swash! Su Zimo's movements were different. His body swayed and he left behind a series of afterimages. Raising his left arm, he punched down and smashed the head of another person. Brains splattered. Another corpse was strewn on the streets. How dare you! You must have a death wish. The dozens of cultivators that Cho Wanli brought reacted and hollered, whipping out all sorts of weapons. Most of them were melee weapons that were powerful. One of them raised a gigantic hammer and the wind howled as it smashed towards Su Zimo's head. Su Zimo did not dodge or retreat. Instead, he punched back and used his body to take the person's spirit weapon head-on. Instead, the person's hammer was sent flying and fell into the embrace of another cultivator, shattering his sternum. The broken bones were as sharp as spears and pierced his lungs. That person panted heavily and a bellow-like breathing sound came from his throat. It was heavy and hoarse. It was clear that he was not going to make it. On the long street, figures crisscrossed as Su Zimo weaved through more than 10 cultivators in a split second, causing the sounds of collisions to ring out. In less than 10 breaths, everything returned to silence and there were only dozens of corpses left on the ground. Chapter 362. Everything happened way too quickly. Even the bystanders were stunned, let alone Cho Wanli and the others who were in the battlefield. A long time later, shock flashed through their eyes. Looking at the green-robed cultivator standing in the pool of blood, A single word flashed through everyone's minds: decisive to kill. Cho Wanli's first slash missed. That person did not give him a second chance at all. That person's temperament is rather suitable for roaming the ancient battlefield. It's a pity. A cultivator in the crowd shook his head. Given the vengeful nature of the 4 mounted bandits, Cho Wanli is dead. They'll definitely torture those people to death. Unless they can find a major sect in Xiantian City to rely on. Even though those top sects aren't afraid of the 4 mounted bandits, no one is willing to offend the 4 mounted bandits for the sake of those few people. No sect will take them in. On the long street, Su Zimo turned around with a calm expression and whispered, "Let's leave this place first." Ji Chengtian and the others nodded. At that moment they realized what was going on as well. In the ancient battlefield in Xiantian City, there was no logic or rules to speak of. This was a world where the strong preyed on the weak. It was cruel and bloody. Bloodstains that had yet to dry could be seen everywhere on the streets, as though they were telling of a massacre that happened not long ago. A battle could break out at any moment and the other cultivators would only watch on with the mentality of watching the show. No one would help out. If they were to show weakness here, their opponents would only make things worse. The crowd on the streets dispersed and many cultivators looked at Su Zimo and the others as though they were looking at dead people. At that moment, the most important thing for Ji Chengtian and the others was to find a place to rest for the night and recover their stamina before recuperating from their injuries. In Xiantian City, the well-preserved buildings had long been occupied by many factions and cultivators, leaving only a few crumbling buildings. After walking for a while more, Su Zimo and the others found a dilapidated house at a street corner. It was not accurate to call it a house. That was because the surrounding walls of the house had long collapsed, and there were only broken walls left. The courtyard was overgrown with weeds and the few houses were dilapidated as well. "Let's rest here for the night first." Su Zimo knew that they would not be able to find a good place to stay even if they continued searching. Furthermore, Ji Chengtian, Lung Ro and the others were already exhausted, and it was inconvenient for them to move around. "Bro, you guys rest first. I'll go out and check out Xiantian City." Little Fatty leaned over and whispered. "Be careful." Su Zimo's eyes nodded. After all, Little Fatty had cultivated body tempering techniques and his physique was much stronger than Ji Chengtian, Lung Ro and the rest. Furthermore, Little Fatty looked chubby and smiled before speaking. He was slick and alert. Su Zimo was not worried about his safety. His ends in Hell City S. Although Xiantian City could fend off the ancient living beings and beasts outside, it could not stop the greed in the hearts of some cultivators. They were even more savage and terrifying than the demon beasts outside the city. Ji Chengtian and the others did not want to burden Su Zimo, and made use of the time to recuperate and recover their stamina. Before long, Little Fatty returned. "Bro, I found out." Little Fatty pursed his lips and said in a deep voice, "There are a few top factions in Xiantian City. Glass Palace of the Immortal Sects, Malevolent Earth Sect of the Fiend Sects, Puppet Sect of the 5 Heretical Doctrines and Elixir Yang Sect and Chiguraman of the 4 Unorthodox Groups." Ji Chengtian and the others frowned with grim expressions. Immortal Sects, Fiend Sects, Unorthodox Groups and Heretical Doctrines. Those were the top factions of Tianhuang mainland. If they had not ventured deep into the ancient battlefield, they might not have had the chance to interact with those top factions in their entire lives. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Glass Palace of the Immortal Sects, Puppet Sect of the Heretical Doctrines, Elixir Yang Sect and Chiguraman. He had never come into contact with any of them before. However, he had interacted with the 7 Fiend Sects a few years ago. Deep underground, Su Zimo encountered a few Fiend Heirs, and managed to kill the Fiend Heir of Malevolent Earth Sect despite fighting against 5 of them alone. To be fair, the Fiend Heir of Malevolent Earth Sect died an unjust death in that battle. If not for the fact that the Fiend Heirs could not unleash their full strength due to the Spirit Lock formation, the one who died would have been Su Zimo. After a few years, Malevolent Earth Sect must have chosen a new Fiend Heir. Of course, Su Zimo was not worried about being recognized by Malevolent Earth Sect. In that battle back then, the powerful skeleton's final struggle caused the world to collapse. Later on, according to Demonist G, other than the 2 of them, only the 5 Fiend Heirs survived. In other words, no one from Malevolent Earth Sect had seen him before. Little Fatty continued. Among them, The weaker ones are Elixir Yang sect and Chiguramon. Elixir Yang sect is the largest elixir refinement sect in Tianhuang, mainland, with a deep foundation that can be traced back to the ancient era. Chiguramon is the largest talisman sect, and the spirit crane, the most common communication tool in the cultivation world, was created by Chiguramon. When they heard about the origins of Elixir Yang sect and Chiguramon, Su Xiaoning and Lung Ro's eyes lit up. If they had the chance to join those two sects to cultivate elixir and talisman refinement, they would definitely be able to progress further on their cultivation path. Ji Qingtian nodded. Since they're from the heretical doctrines, their forte lies in elixir and talisman refinement. Naturally, they're weaker in terms of combat strength. However, elixir refinement masters and talisman refinement masters will definitely have some experts following them. Little Fatty gulped and said slowly with a grim expression, apart from those few major factions, there's another faction in Xiantian City that even those top factions are not willing to offend. That is, the Four Mounted Bandits. When they heard that, Ji Chengtian and the others' hearts sank. Is it related to the dozens of cultivators at the North City Gate? Ji Chengtian asked with a frown. Little Fatty nodded. Just now, the leader of the group of people killed by first is Cho Wanli. He's a capable subordinate of the Four Mounted Bandits. What's the background of the Four Mounted Bandits? Why are the immortal and fiend sects not willing to offend them? Shi Jian asked. Little Fatty replied. The strength of the Four Mounted Bandits is definitely not comparable to super sects such as Glass Palace and Malevolent Earth Sect. However, it's said that the Four Mounted Bandits are ferocious and strong. Their subordinates are also a bunch of desperados. If a bloody battle were to break out, even if super sects such as Glass Palace and Malevolent Earth Sect were to win, they would definitely suffer great losses. Therefore, up till now, the Four Mounted Bandits and the other top factions have been living in harmony. When they heard that, Ji Chengtian and the others had terrible expressions and their hearts were in a mess. Offending such a faction meant that they could be surrounded and killed in Xiantian City at any moment. The danger within the city might be even greater than outside. Little Fatty said, first, you can't blame this matter for that. What the Four Mounted Bandits do is murder and plunder. Any cultivator who enters the city through the North Gate will have a hard time surviving as long as they aren't strong or have no background. They're a bunch of vicious people with extremely cruel methods who take pleasure in killing. Even if they hand over all the treasures in their storage bags, they won't be able to escape death. At that point, Little Fatty sighed softly. I heard that there are more than 1,000 cultivators who have died in the hands of the Four Mounted Bandits in the past month. A cold glint flashed through Su Zimo's half-closed eyes. Chapter 363. Su Xiaoning frowned slightly and asked, since the Four Mounted Bandits are evil and heartless, why isn't anyone from the immortal sects standing out to uphold justice? In her opinion, those of the immortal sects were supposed to slay demons and defend the Tao. How could they ignore this matter? Jingdong shook his head. In the cultivation world, there are no chivalrous men who uphold justice for the heavens. It's the same for those of the immortal sections. Immortals and fiends are merely different in their pursuit of the Tao. That's right. Those chivalrous men don't live for long. Little Fatty nodded as well. Lung Ro added, Buddhists are merciful and care about delivering all living beings from torment. Even though the Four Mounted Bandits have committed heinous crimes, none of the monks in Xiantian City have gone to convert them. Suddenly, Su Zimo asked, what are the cultivation realms of the Four Mounted Bandits? Little Fatty replied, the eldest, Chai Li, is at 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment. Second, Lang Tan, third, Hu Meng, and fourth, Bao Yunfeng, are all at 6 Meridian Foundation Establishment. It's said that the four of them grew up drinking the milk of ancient remnant beasts and roamed the forests all year round, tempering their tendons and bones. All of them possess immense strength comparable to demon beasts. When he heard that, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment. He had finally encountered a 7 Meridian Foundation establishment after venturing deep into the ancient battlefield. Given Su Zimo's current strength, be it in terms of immortal cultivation or melee combat, he could kill all 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. However, Su Zimo had no confidence against a 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator without using his power of blood qi. After all, His cultivation realm was only at 4 Meridian Foundation establishment, and he had yet to attain lesser mastery of the orifice clearing section of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, as well as his mouth and eye orifices were not unlocked. The further one progressed, the harder it was to unlock all 8 meridians. Correspondingly, the difference in cultivation realm would be greater as well. On the surface, a 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator would only unlock 1 more meridian than a 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. However, their strength would increase by several folds. Dozens of 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators might not even be a match for a 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. Later on, when all 8 meridians were connected, the difference would be even more obvious. If one of the 4 mounted bandits had a 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator with a physique as strong as a demon beast and specialized in melee combat, even Suzimo would find it troublesome. The courtyard fell into a long period of silence. A short while later, Little Fatty continued, however, I heard that only the 4th of the 4 mounted bandits, Bao Yunfeng, is guarding Xintian City. The other 3 are out and might only return after a few days. In the current situation, Suzimo and the others were in a passive position. Night had already fallen, and if they were to escape from Xintian City now, they would have to face countless ferocious beasts and ancient living beings outside. Other than Suzimo, the rest of them would most likely be doomed. However, if they were to continue staying in the city, given the vengeful nature and methods of the 4 mounted bandits, they would definitely not let them survive the night. Ta! Ta! At this moment, the ground began to shake irregularly. The sound of hooves was like thunder, coming from afar. It was approaching at an extremely fast speed. Dodge! It's the 4 mounted bandits. Ah! The crowd was in chaos and exclamations could be heard. Some of the cultivators who could not dodge in time were trampled into meat paste on the spot without a corpse. Their leader seems to be the 4th Bao Yunfeng. That's him. His mount is an ancient remnant beast, the cloud-seeking leopard. There's no mistake about it. Not far away, a huge cloud of dust billowed over with a pungent stench of blood. The leader was a burly man with a tall figure and shoulder-length black hair. His gaze was sharp and ferocious. Beneath that person was a tall and ferocious leopard with sharp fangs and claws. Its fur was lush and shiny, and there were patterns that resembled clouds on its body. In the dark night, its eyes shone with a dark glint. It was an ancient remnant beast, the cloud-seeking leopard. What happened? Why do these people look so murderous? Haven't you heard? More than 10 cultivators of the 4 mounted bandits were killed by an outsider at the North City gates earlier on. Ah, who would be so bold? I heard that the few of them sitting over there were killed by that green-robed cultivator. Some of the cultivators pointed to a mansion not far away. With such a big commotion, it immediately attracted the attention of many cultivators. Although night had fallen, the number of cultivators who gathered here was increasing. Not far away on a 2-story building, a handsome young man in white robes sat by the window with an old man standing behind him with his hands by his side. The handsome young man held a folding fan in his hands. His features were picturesque and his skin was smooth. He looked elegant and had an indescribable temperament. At that moment, the white-robed young man had just stood up and was about to leave when he caught sight of that scene. A hint of curiosity flashed through his eyes as he could not help but ask, "Uncle Liang, what's going on over there?" The old man behind the white-robed young man replied, "I heard that the green-robed cultivator killed Qiu Wanli." "Oh," the white-robed young man sneered, "Qiu Wanli, huh? Well done. Someone as heinous as that should have died long ago." Although his tone was cold, the white-robed young man's voice was extremely pleasant. "Young master, let's go. There's nothing much to see here. Bao Yunfeng brought so many people here. Those people are definitely dead." The old man bowed. "It's fine." The white-robed young man waved it off. "Let's wait and see." After he finished speaking, the white-clothed young man opened his small fan and sat back down. He turned his head slightly, revealing his slender white jade-like neck. His watery gaze landed on the delicate and pretty face in the dilapidated courtyard. More than 100 cultivators sprinted over in the night with ferocious expressions. The cold gleam of their spirit weapons was extremely blinding in the night. At that moment, Ji Chengtian and the others had just rested for less than 5 minutes and were still aching all over. Yet, the other party had already arrived. What should we do? Ji Chengtian and the others looked at Su Zimo instinctively. Su Zimo was seated on the spot with his legs crossed, still resting. The night spirit was sprawled on the ground without even raising his head. His pitch-black eyes were hidden in the night as he scanned the ancient remnant beast, cloud-seeking leopard, before retracting his gaze. The moment Bao Yunfeng stepped into the courtyard, Su Zimo suddenly opened his eyes and stood up from the ground without any action. Initially, Bao Yunfeng led 100 desperados over with a frightening aura, and even the surrounding cultivators shuddered. However, as Su Zimo opened his eyes and stood up, another torrential aura burst forth. It was as though a tsunami had been set off, surging, roaring and surging over. Su Zimo was alone and stood on the spot without moving. Although his body looked frail, he was not weaker than the aura of Bao Yunfeng and the others. If Bao Yunfeng and the others were said to bring a rain of blood, behind Su Zimo was a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. On a 2-story building not far away, the old man called Uncle Liang was slightly moved when he saw this scene, and he let out a soft cry of surprise. The white-robed young man's eyes flickered with a strange glint as well. Chapter 364. The two powerful auras collided invisibly in the void. The weeds in the courtyard turned into dust silently, and even the air seemed to have frozen. Swords were drawn. Ji Changtian and the others' palms were sweating as they watched everything nervously, feeling as though their hearts were about to stop beating. The people before them were completely different from the cultivators at the borders of the ancient battlefield. These people were desperados and were even stronger. Their methods were savage and they did not fear death. A single charge was enough to drown them. Nobody could imagine how much pressure Su Zimo was under in the face of such a situation. However, everyone, including the surrounding cultivators, could not see any hint of panic on Su Zimo's face. There was only calmness and composure. To be able to maintain his composure under such circumstances, this man's mental fortitude is truly strong. So what? The outcome is still the same. Unless he's at 7 Meridian Foundation establishment, he's definitely going to die today. I heard that he's at 4 Meridian Foundation establishment. Bao Yunfeng rode the cloud-seeking leopard to a spot not far away from the courtyard and looked down at Su Zimo from above, the glint in his eyes intensifying. Piak, piak, piak. Suddenly, Bao Yunfeng clapped and nodded repeatedly with a smile. Very good, very good. Many cultivators were confused, not understanding what Bao Yunfeng meant by that. A moment later, Bao Yunfeng said, "Green robes, scholarly appearance. Seems like you were the one who killed Cho Wanli?" "It was me." Su Zimo's tone was calm as he admitted it without hesitation. "Fufu." Suddenly, Bao Yunfeng laughed and said leisurely, "My initial motive for coming was indeed to capture you alive and torture you slowly. I have countless ways to make someone suffer a fate worse than death. However," after a slight pause, Bao Yunfeng changed the topic. "I've suddenly changed my mind." Everyone was stunned. Ji Chengtian and the others were stunned as well, not understanding what Bao Yunfeng meant by that. On the second floor, the white-robed man frowned slightly in deep thought. Su Zimo's expression was indifferent. He didn't answer. He just looked at Bao Yunfeng quietly, waiting for his explanation. Bao Yunfeng's eyes flashed with admiration. "Originally, I thought you were just a reckless cultivator. But now I have to admit that you are quite something. Cho Wanli's death was not unjust. I'll give you a chance. Follow me and I'll let bygones be bygones." Hearing this, a commotion broke out in the crowd. There's actually such a good thing? This person's life is really tough. There's a glimmer of hope at his darkest hour. Looks like Bao Yunfeng really does view this person in a different light. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made such a decision. Cho Wanli's death was in vain. Such a change was completely out of the expectations of many cultivators. Originally, they had all thought that Su Zimo was dead for sure. Who would have thought that the fourth of the 4 mounted bandits, Bao Yunfeng, would take him under his wing? "Have you changed your mind?" Su Zimo suddenly asked. Bao Yunfeng was slightly stunned, then nodded and said, "That's right. Since this is your first time in Xintian City, I can remind you that I, Bao Yunfeng, am one of the 4 mounted bandits. In Xintian City." Before Bao Yunfeng could finish, Su Zimo interrupted him. However, I haven't changed my mind. Bao Yunfeng narrowed his eyes and focused his gaze on Su Zimo, asking, "What do you mean by that?" Su Zimo raised his head slightly and looked at Bao Yunfeng expressionlessly, saying indifferently, "I was prepared to kill you previously and it's the same now. Therefore prepare to die." The moment he said that, an uproar broke out. Is this person crazy? He truly doesn't know what's good for him. Ji Chengtian and the others were silent. No matter what, they would support Su Zimo's decision. Although they were not chivalrous men, they would be conflicted if they were to follow the four mounted bandits, who were as vicious as the four mounted bandits. However, if they were in this life and death situation, they might have chosen to submit and endure it. They could not be like Su Zimo, who was resolute and unyielding. This was a kind of fearless boldness. On the second floor, the white-robed man's eyes shone brightly as he looked at the green-robed cultivator below, as though he wanted to see through the latter. In the courtyard, after hearing Su Zimo's words, Bao Yunfeng froze for a long time before bursting into laughter. His laughter grew louder and louder. Fufu ha ha ha. Although Bao Yunfeng was laughing, the killing intent in his eyes intensified and was almost corporeal. As one of the four mounted bandits, he could do whatever he wanted in Xintian City, and nobody dared to provoke him. But now someone had popped out of nowhere and threatened to kill him. Good, I wasn't wrong about you. Bao Yunfeng's gaze was cold as he leaped down from the cloud-seeking leopard and walked towards Su Zimo slowly. 6 spirit meridians lit up beneath his robes and spirit energy surged, howling. Peak 6 Meridian Foundation Establishment. Don't interfere. Bao Yunfeng shouted before smirking menacingly at Su Zimo. I'm going to slice you into pieces personally. Before his sentence was finished, 2 figures flashed and sped towards each other. Bao Yunfeng's hands trembled and 2 daggers that shone with a cold glint slid out from his sleeves. They were extremely sharp and shone with 4 spirit lights. Supreme-grade spirit weapons. There were not many cultivators at the borders of the ancient battlefield who possessed supreme-grade spirit weapons. However, Bao Yunfeng had 2 supreme-grade spirit weapons in Xintian City. Swash! Bao Yunfeng crossed his hands and the 2 daggers sliced towards Su Zimo's throat at an extremely fast speed. The 2 daggers even sealed off Su Zimo's angle of attack. Melee combat was the most dangerous and a single mistake could lead to death. The sharpness of a supreme-grade spirit weapon was enough to threaten Su Zimo. Su Zimo did not dare to be careless and did not reach out to take it head-on. Instead, he slid to the side and dodged the 2 incoming daggers. In reality, Su Zimo could have used Blood Quencher to take it head-on. However, Blood Quencher was a perfect spirit weapon at the end of the day, and could easily attract the attention of other cultivators, resulting in endless battles. In Xintian City, Su Zimo would not use it unless he had no other choice. Su Zimo dodged to the side and dodged Bao Yunfeng's killing move. In a flash, he left behind a series of afterimages and closed in at an even faster speed, sending out a palm strike. That palm strike was majestic and spread out with 5 fingers, as though it was going to rip the ground apart. Earth-rupturing palm. Bao Yunfeng's eyelids twitched and his expression changed starkly when he sensed Su Zimo's speed and the power of that palm strike. His movement technique was too fast and his strength was too strong. Instantly, Bao Yunfeng realized that he would not be a match for Su Zimo in terms of strength if he did not have 2 sharp supreme-grade spirit weapons in his hands. In a flash, Bao Yunfeng composed himself and hollered with a cold glint in his eyes. Good timing. Bao Yunfeng raised the dagger in his hand and stabbed it towards Su Zimo's palm. The other dagger stabbed forward cleanly towards the latter's heart. Although that attack was extremely obscure, it was a killing move. If Su Zimo took another step forward, it would be equivalent to his chest colliding with Bao Yunfeng's dagger. If it was anyone else, they would be extremely lucky to be able to stop in time against Bao Yunfeng's counterattack. However, he was facing Su Zimo, who possessed spirit perception and an unparalleled physique. Su Zimo, who had never tasted defeat in close combat. Chapter 365. The surrounding cultivators held their breaths and stared fixedly at the 2 figures on the battlefield. They did not even blink. The 2 of them fought with speed and their figures intersected in a dazzling manner. It was possible that victory would be decided in the blink of an eye. The 4 mounted bandits were all body-tempered cultivators, and were extremely proficient in melee combat. Among them, Bao Yunfeng's forte was speed and agility. He wielded a pair of sharp daggers in his hands and wielded them with ease. The angles of his attacks were extremely tricky and difficult to deal with. The number of cultivators who had died under his pair of daggers was innumerable. On the battlefield, Divine Steed Fleeting was extremely fast and was about to collide with Bao Yunfeng's daggers. Su Zimo's eyes lit up and he changed his stance at the last minute. Using the stance of Plow Heaven Stride, he took a step forward and stomped on the ground, stopping instantly. Boom! The moment Su Zimo's feet landed on the ground, the green bricks on the long street cracked and a gigantic ravine appeared. Dust flew and the entire ground trembled. Su Zimo's aura was immense as he strode forth with Plow Heaven Stride as though he wanted to tear the firmaments apart. Caught off guard, Bao Yunfeng's legs went limp and he lost his balance slightly as his pupils constricted. Crackle! Su Zimo's tendons and bones sounded at the same time as his body expanded. Like an ancient divine being, he reached out with his gigantic hands that looked weak and powerless towards the two incoming daggers. One coiled and one shook. Ah! Bao Yunfeng exclaimed and his palm split open, dripping with fresh blood as the two daggers flew out of his hands. Everyone was shocked when they saw that. What sort of physique and strength was required to send Bao Yunfeng's two supreme-grade spirit weapons flying with his bare hands? Not good. Bao Yunfeng was alarmed and knew that things were bad. However, he reacted extremely quickly and retreated immediately. He withdrew a protection talisman from his storage bag and crushed it on the spot before turning to flee. Trying to escape? Su Zimo harumphed coldly with a murderous intent in his eyes. If Bao Yunfeng were to escape back into the crowd, it would be difficult to kill him once he was obstructed by the 100 desperados. Su Zimo's figure flickered as he exerted force on both his feet. Sinking into the soil, he burst forth in an instant. Su Zimo took a big step forward, covering a distance of more than 10 feet. He caught up with Bao Yunfeng in just a few steps, and threw a punch at Bao Yunfeng's head. Boom! The veins on his fist bulged and swelled up. It was like a greenish-black seal that emitted a bloody aura. It crashed down with a majestic and heavy aura. Roar! The cloud-seeking leopard reacted faster than cultivators. Sensing that its master was in danger, it roared furiously and its fur stood on end. Emitting a rich demonic chi, it bared its sharp claws and pounced towards Su Zimo fiercely. An ancient remnant at the peak of the Foundation establishment realm was enough to threaten Su Zimo in terms of strength. If he was struck by the cloud-seeking leopard, Su Zimo's body would not be able to withstand it and would suffer an additional wound. In fact, he might even die on the spot. However, Su Zimo's expression was unchanged. Although he saw a large black shadow pouncing over, he had no intention of changing his stance and punched towards Bao Yunfeng's head with his fist. Just as the cloud-seeking leopard's sharp claws were about to land on Su Zimo's body, another strong black shadow charged over at an even faster speed. Bang! Bang! Almost at the same time, there were two deafening sounds. The cloud-seeking leopard was sent flying by the black shadow and the two strong figures fell together, kicking up dust. The cloud-seeking leopard let out a tragic cry. The black shadow stood up and extended its claws that shone with a cold glint silently. It had already scratched a few bloody holes on the cloud-seeking leopard's body, and blood was gushing out. The black shadow was Night Spirit who was sprawled at the side. Under the cover of the night, the scales on Night Spirit's body shone with a cold glint. His eyes were dark and mysterious as he exuded a murderous aura that was shuddering. The cloud-seeking leopard struggled to stand up and opened its mouth, biting towards Night Spirit's throat. After all, it was an ancient remnant beast that still had the strength to fight to the death despite being severely injured. The tail behind Night Spirit swayed. A black shadow flashed. Poof! Like a pitch-black spear, Night Spirit's tail pierced through the cloud-seeking leopard's head instantly, entering through its mouth and emerging from the back of its head. The ancient remnant beast, cloud-seeking leopard, died on the spot. At the same time on the other side, Su Zimo's greenish-black seal smashed down, shattering Bao Yunfeng's protection talisman and landing on Bao Yunfeng's back with some strength. Buzz! For spirit lights shone from Bao Yunfeng's back and a shimmering inner armor was revealed. 4 spirit patterns. It was a supreme-grade defensive spirit weapon. Although Su Zimo's punch was strong, It was blocked by the protection talisman and more than half of its power was dissipated. Immediately after, it was blocked by the supreme-grade defensive spirit weapon. Bao Yunfeng was almost unharmed and instead, he seized the opportunity to dash forward. Heh! Bao Yunfeng laughed and shouted, "You want to kill me? You're still lacking." After saying that, Bao Yunfeng did not hear Su Zimo's reply. Instead, he felt the killing intent behind him intensifying, as though a terrifying, ferocious beast was charging over. Instinctively, Bao Yunfeng turned back to take a look. That single glance scared him out of his wits. Su Zimo released Divine Steed Fleeting, and left a series of afterimages in the void behind him. The distance between the two of them closed rapidly, and he was almost right in front of Bao Yunfeng. Go! The many desperados that Bao Yunfeng brought along reacted as well and summoned their flying swords hurriedly, stabbing towards Su Zimo. Instantly, sword chi streaked through the void and spirit lights shone brightly. Pang! 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 Su Zimo lowered his body and sprawled on the ground, sliding forward. His tendons and bones sounded at the same time, and the sound of a bowstring vibrating could be heard. Extending his arms, his body elongated rapidly like an anaconda. Su Zimo's arms landed on Bao Yunfeng's waist powerlessly, and he coiled around the latter. Many of the flying swords missed. At that moment, Su Zimo was almost completely plastered to Bao Yunfeng's body. His body was soft and boneless as he coiled around Bao Yunfeng with a cold gaze. On the second floor, the white-robed man closed his eyes instinctively. It was as though he could see an anaconda coiling around Bao Yunfeng's body. The anaconda sucked in air and its tendons trembled, expanding at a visible speed. Pust! Taking a deep breath, the white-robed man opened his eyes and looked down. Crack! 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 Bao Yunfeng's limbs were bound as he stood motionlessly on the spot. His entire body was compressed and the sound of bones cracking could be heard. A supreme-grade defensive spirit weapon could defend against the sharpness of spirit weapons and the impact of their powers. However, it could not defend against the compression of such a soft force. Anaconda coiling around him. Bao Yunfeng's eyes bulged and were bloodshot. His tongue stuck out and his face turned purplish-red in a menacing manner as he grunted from the depths of his throat. The 100 desperados were also stunned by this scene and froze on the spot. At that moment, Su Zimo and Bao Yunfeng were almost intertwined. If they were to make a move, they might not be able to save Bao Yunfeng. Instead, there was a high chance that they would injure him. Splash! The sound of blood surging could be heard from Su Zimo's body like a tsunami with a frightening aura. Die! Su Zimo hollered and his body expanded by an inch once more. His muscles bulged and his strength burst forth, crushing Bao Yunfeng into a blood mist with a thud. One of the 4 mounted bandits had died in Xintian City. Chapter 366. There were at least a few thousand cultivators gathered here. However, at that moment, it was dead silent both inside and outside the residence, as though everyone was choked by their throats and could not breathe. It was way too tragic. The 4 mounted bandits were known for their strong physiques and melee combat strength. Among them, Bao Yunfeng was agile and had explosive speed. Apart from 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators who could suppress him, he was almost invincible among 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. If they had not witnessed it personally, no one would have believed that Bao Yunfeng would be killed by a 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator in melee combat without an intact corpse. More than that, no one would have believed that someone would dare to take Bao Yunfeng's life in Xintian City. Something big had happened. It did not matter if Bao Yunfeng was dead. However, given how cruel and violent the other 3 mounted bandits were, many innocent cultivators would be implicated in their rage. On the second floor, the white-robed man put away his small fan with a strange glint in his eyes. Suddenly he asked, "Uncle Liang, what do you think of this person? He's strong in melee combat and is decisive in his attacks." Uncle Liang said deeply, however, "This lad doesn't know how to endure and is too rash. While he's happy, there's no turning back between him and the 4 mounted bandits and he's dead for sure. I'm rather interested in him." The white-robed man smiled gently and said. Uncle Liang frowned. "Young master, you want to recruit him?" "I do have that intention." The white-robed man nodded. Uncle Yang said. If we recruit him now, it'll be equivalent to offending the 4 mounted bandits, and that's too irrational. The reason why we entered the ancient battlefield this time round is for the Elixir Pool sect ruins. It's not wise for us to become enemies with such a strong enemy. Pausing for a moment, Uncle Yang continued, right now, Glass Palace, Malevolent Earth Sect, and a few other major factions are lingering around Xiantian City. They're probably here for the Elixir Pool sect ruins. Compared to Glass Palace and Malevolent Earth Sect, we lack top experts and have a small advantage. You have to be careful, young master. Top expert. The white-robed man smiled and his beautiful gaze landed on the green-robed cultivator in the residence. Raising his head, he said, "Isn't there one of them?" Him. Uncle Yang also smiled and said, "Although this old man is old, I haven't reached the point where my eyesight is failing. Although this person is strong in melee combat, he can't be considered as a top expert, right?" The white-robed man. In the courtyard, Su Zimo's python coiling around Bao Yunfeng had killed him. His green robes were dyed scarlet as he stood in the pool of blood. His entire being was exuding a murderous aura. His gaze was as sharp as a blade, exuding a sharp killing intent. Kill. After Bao Yunfeng's death, the hundreds of desperados did not retreat. Instead, they roared and charged toward Su Zimo with their machetes in hand. These were desperados, all of them were people who didn't care about their own lives. The ferocious horses that the desperados rode were Foundation establishment spirit demons as well. Their eyes were bloodshot and they possessed frightening strength. If they were to collide with a cultivator, the latter would be torn apart. Over 100 cavalrymen rushed over, bringing with them a cloud of dust. Their momentum was terrifying. If it was anyone else present, they would avoid the edge of such a formation at the first possible moment, as they were deeply afraid of being annihilated and trampled into mush by the cavalry. However, Su Zimo did not retreat or evade. His eyes lit up as he activated his bloodline. The sound of waves and rolling thunder resounded from within his body, giving off an imposing aura. Driving his bloodline, his strength surged. Boom! Su Zimo exhaled and stretched out a pair of huge palms. He pressed them on the heads of the 2 horses that were charging over and suddenly exerted his strength. His sleeves exploded instantly, revealing 2 muscular arms. His muscles were knotted together inch by inch, as though they were molten steel and filled with explosive power. How strong was the impact of a galloping horse? Most of the other demon beasts in the forest would not dare to take it head-on, let alone cultivators. However, right in front of countless gazes, the 2 ferocious horses were pinned to the ground by Su Zimo's palms and could not advance at all. Su Zimo's feet sank deep into the mud as he stood on the spot like an ancient god. His gaze was deep and unmoving. Caught off guard, the 2 desperados on the horses were sent flying instantly. Little Fatty and Shijian each wielded a gigantic axe and a metal rod respectively. Taking advantage of the dizziness of the 2 men as they tumbled in midair, the 2 of them ended their lives easily. There was no way the 2 ferocious horses could withstand the pincer attack of 2 different forces. Their tendons and bones were shattered as their flesh exploded. With a tragic cry, they died on the spot. The cavalry at the back could not charge forward either as they fell to the ground one after another in a mess. Right in front, a ferocious horse charged toward Su Zimo's chest. Heh! Su Zimo sneered and strode forward. Bending his knees, he charged forward like a ferocious horse as well. Bang! The tall and muscular spirit demon horse was sent flying by a seemingly short human. Its body exploded into a mist of blood. Roar! Right then, Night Spirit lowered his front limbs and head in an attacking stance. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and let out a deafening roar from the depths of his throat. The ferocious spirit demon horses that were initially filled with battle intent and killing intent were so scared that their legs went limp and their eyes shone with endless fear. Those spirit demons did not recognize Night Spirit. However, they had a deep-rooted fear that originated from the source of their bloodline towards that roar. Some of the ferocious horses trembled and knelt on the ground, peeing and shitting themselves out of fright. Some of the ferocious horses seemed to have gone mad as they flung the cultivators on their backs off. They then pushed through the crowd and fled into the distance at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, the 100 desperados were in a mess. The surrounding cultivators were shocked, and the way they looked at Night Spirit changed gradually. Even though they were clearly uninvolved, they felt their hearts skip a beat the moment Night Spirit roared and almost turned to flee. Su Zimo slapped his storage bag and 18 flying swords appeared before him. Buzz! The 18 flying swords trembled at the same time and let out a clear sword hum. Spirit lights shone brightly on the swords and they shone continuously. Supreme-grade flying swords. All of them are supreme-grade flying swords. I wonder how many people he killed to be able to gather 18 supreme-grade flying swords. A series of exclamations sounded from the crowd. On the second floor, the white-robed man and Uncle Liang exclaimed softly at the same time. Uncle Liang frowned and shook his head with a strange expression. That's not right. The length, width, thickness and even the patterns on the 18 supreme-grade flying swords are exactly the same. They don't look like they were gathered together. Instead, they look like they were created by a weapon refinement master. If I'm not wrong, he should be a sword formation master, the white-robed man suddenly said. Before the white-robed man finished his sentence, Su Zimo waved his hands in the courtyard and the 18 flying swords intersected in the void, leaving behind streams of sword chi that did not dissipate. Whoosh! The light of the formation pattern shone brightly and illuminated half the night skies. The 18 flying swords gathered together with their tips pointing outwards, forming a gigantic sword-shaped disc. Like a blazing sun, it released 18 streams of sword chi that were blinding and sharp. The candlelight sword formation. Go! Su Zimo pointed forward. The sword-shaped disc charged into the crowd and circled around the 100 desperados, shuttling back and forth. Endless sword chi was released and blood mist spewed as severed limbs flew everywhere. Chapter 367. Sword Formation Master. To think that he's a sword formation master. No wonder that man could reach Xintian City even though he's only at 4 Meridian Foundation establishment. So that's what he's relying on. Sword formation masters were extremely rare in the cultivation world, and caused a series of exclamations. On the second floor, Uncle Liang took a deep breath and exclaimed softly with a changed expression. The killing power of that sword formation is so strong. Do you recognize it, Uncle Liang? The white-robed man asked. After pondering for a long time, Uncle Liang shook his head. I've never seen it before. The power of that sword formation is probably not weaker than that of ancient Array sect. Elixir Yang sect, Chiguraman, 100 Refinement sect and Ancient Array sect were known as the 4 unorthodox groups, and gathered the top elixir refinement masters, talisman masters, weapon refinement masters and array formation masters in Tianhuang mainland. They were the holy grounds for those 4 types of cultivators. Most of the famous sword formation masters in the cultivation world came from Ancient Array sect. Uncle Liang shook his head again. It's a pity that this person's cultivation realm is too low. If he's truly at 7 Meridian Foundation establishment, he'll definitely be qualified to fight against the legacy disciples of Glass Palace and Malevolent Earth sect with that sword formation of his. Let's go down and take a look. The white-robed man rose and led the way. Uncle Liang advised, young master, although this person has great potential, he won't live for long. Once the 3 mounted bandits return to Xintian City, he'll be dead. It's truly unwise to recruit him now. Not necessarily. The white-robed man smiled meaningfully. In the courtyard, the 100 desperados were all at 6 Meridian Foundation establishment. If they were to join forces against Su Zimo, they would definitely be a force to be reckoned with and could even disperse the candlelight sword formation. But now, the formation of the 100 desperados was scattered by Su Zimo and Night Spirit. Their strength was scattered, and they could not defend against the killing power of the candlelight sword formation. Clang! 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 The sounds of swords ringing were endless, accompanied by tragic cries. Lives were like grass that were reaped mercilessly by the sword formation. The desperados had truly lost their lives. The dilapidated courtyard was already stained with blood. Even superior-grade spirit weapons would be sliced into pieces if they were swept by the candlelight sword formation, let alone flesh and blood. The air was filled with the strong smell of blood. Even the desperados couldn't take it anymore. They collapsed on the spot and fled in all directions. In the blink of an eye, all that was left in the courtyard were corpses that were still warm. The surrounding cultivators were horrified. In their eyes, the figure standing in the pool of blood was like a Shura that had walked out from hell. Bao Yunfeng is dead. Once the other 3 mounted bandits return, this person will definitely die. That might not be the case. After tonight, they'll leave this place during the day tomorrow. They might be able to escape this calamity by fleeing thousands of miles away. The person who spoke first sneered. Do you think the 3 mounted bandits are pushovers? Those people live in the forest all year round and are best at tracking. It's useless even if you run to the ends of the earth. Su Zimo withdrew the 18 flying swords and collected the storage pouches of Bao Yunfeng and the others. He acted as if he didn't hear the discussions around him, and his expression was normal. Ji Chengtian and the others also heaved a sigh of relief. The crowd dispersed gradually. Sensing something, Su Zimo glanced sideways and caught sight of a white-robed young man walking over from not far away. The white-robed young man was extremely handsome, and could even be considered as a peerless beauty. At first glance he looked even better than a woman. However, what surprised Su Zimo even more was that there was a gray-haired old man following behind the white-robed young man. Although there was no age restriction in the ancient battlefield, those who entered were all geniuses of the younger generation. The sudden appearance of an old man was rather odd. Furthermore, Su Zimo's spirit perception told him that the old man was extremely dangerous. After entering the ancient battlefield, Su Zimo had experienced many battles. However, he had never sensed such an aura from a cultivator before. It was terrifying and shuddering. Su Zimo looked deeply at the gray-haired old man before turning back to the white-robed young man. The white-robed young man held a small fan in reverse and cupped his fists with a smile. I'm Tang Yu. How should I address you, fellow Taoist? Su Zimo. Su Zimo's gaze landed on the sect badge on the person's waist as he replied without batting an eyelid. Most of the sects and factions that dared to display their sect badges in the ancient battlefield were major sects and factions. Misty Peak was one of the 5 major sects in the territory of the Great Zhou dynasty. However, it was nothing in Tianhuang mainland. Su Zimo and the others had nothing on their waists other than a storage bag. However, although Su Zimo guessed that the white-robed young man's background was not simple, he did not recognize the sect badge nor did he know the other party's intentions. Tang Yu flicked his slender wrist and opened his folding fan, fanning it gently. Fellow Taoist, you must not know much about the 4 mounted bandits since this is your first time in Xiantian City. However, I do know some information. I'm willing to hear the details. Su Zimo nodded. The so-called 4 mounted bandits are actually arranged according to jackals, wolves, tigers and leopards. Each of them has a powerful ancient remnant beast as their mount. Among them, the leader, Chai Li, is at 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment while the other 3 are at Peak 6 Meridian Foundation Establishment and could advance to 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment at any moment. Tang Yu continued, the 4 mounted bandits are not the strongest in Xiantian City. However, the reason why the other top factions are unwilling to get on bad terms with them is because they have 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment cultivators. Now that Bao Yunfeng is dead, you're like fire and water with the other 3 mounted bandits. There's no turning back now that you have a huge feud with them. Even if you manage to escape from Xiantian City, you'll definitely be caught by the 4 mounted bandits and a battle will be inevitable. Tang Yu spoke frankly while Su Zimo remained silent and looked at him quietly. A moment later, Su Zimo asked, what are you trying to say? I can help you. Tang Yu's words were shocking. Oh. Su Zimo raised his brow. Now that he had offended the 4 mounted bandits, no one thought highly of him. Su Zimo had not expected anyone in Xiantian City to help him. Tang Yu continued, of course, by helping you. I don't mean that I'll do my best to stand on your side and fight the 4 mounted bandits head-on. That won't benefit me at all. However, Tang Yu changed the topic. I can help you get rid of all your worries. What do you mean? Su Zimo frowned slightly. Tang Yu's gaze shifted and swept past Ji Chengtian and the others before landing on Su Xiaoning. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly asked, Sister, you're an elixir refinement master, right? Su Zimo did not reply and his expression did not change. However, Su Xiaoning was stunned for a moment as shock flashed through her eyes. Right from the beginning, she had not revealed any signs of elixir refinement. However, how could she not be surprised that this handsome young man before her could identify her with a single glance? When he saw Su Xiaoning's reaction, Tang Yu smiled gently and nodded. Seems like that must be it. Tang Yu continued. Once a bloody battle breaks out with the 4 mounted bandits, this sister's cultivation realm is too low and she won't be of much help. Instead, she'll be a burden. However, I can protect her. If a huge battle broke out and the situation was chaotic, even Night Spirit might not be able to protect Xiaoning from harm. Tang Yu continued. If she has a decent aptitude for elixir refinement, I can even give her a chance to join my sect. What sect are you from? Su Zimo asked instead. Tang Yu replied proudly, one of the 4 unorthodox groups, Elixir Yang sect. Chapter 368. In Tianhuang mainland there were 9 major factions that reigned supreme. 9 immortal sects, 8 demon regions, 7 fiend sects, 6 Buddhist monasteries, 5 heretical doctrines, 4 unorthodox groups, 3 aristocratic families, 2 islands and 1 palace. Elixir Yang sect was one of the 4 unorthodox groups and had a deep foundation. It was said that the sect's history could be traced back to the ancient era. Most of the most famous elixir refinement masters in the cultivation world came from Elixir Yang sect. Although Elixir Yang sect's strength could not compare to the other sects, they were on good terms with most sects and factions because of their elixir refinement capabilities. There was no lack of experts from the cultivation world who joined them as well. Elixirs were consumables but also necessities. Be it in cultivation or on the battlefield, they were crucial and indispensable. Elixir Yang sect was one of the major factions in Xiantian City. As a legacy disciple of Elixir Yang sect, Tang Yu was indeed qualified to say that. At the mention of Elixir Yang sect, Su Xiaoning was moved and her eyes lit up as she looked at Su Zimo expectantly. However, she remained silent obediently. Su Zimo remained silent. Suddenly, a look of determination flashed through Tang Yu's eyes as she said, If you can survive for 15 minutes against the attacks of the 3 mounted bandits, Elixir Yang sect will help you. Young master. Uncle Liang frowned and could not help but remind. In Uncle Liang's opinion, even if Su Zimo could survive for 15 minutes against the attacks of the 3 mounted bandits, it was not enough for Elixir Yang sect to step in. The moment they stepped in, it would mean that they were enemies with the 3 mounted bandits. If things were not handled well, a bloody battle might even break out. That's too risky. Although this person has great potential, it's not worth it, Uncle Liang whispered. Tang Yu shook her head and looked at Su Zimo with a resolute expression, waiting for his reply. Why are you helping me? Su Zimo looked into Tang Yu's eyes and asked calmly. When he saw Su Zimo's reaction, a look of admiration flashed through Uncle Liang's eyes. Although he did not recommend for Tang Yu to step in and help Su Zimo, he could not help but admit that the green-robed cultivator before him was extraordinary. With such a good thing delivered to his door, it was no different from sending charcoal in snowy weather. If it was anyone else, they would have probably agreed long ago. However, this person didn't lose his reason and still refused to budge. Not to mention other things, just this calm temperament was enough to overshadow the other disciples of the younger generation. Tang Yu smiled. There are 2 reasons why I'm helping you. Firstly, it's out of selfishness. I value your potential. Seeing Tang Yu being so honest, Su Zimo lowered his guard as he nodded his head and gestured for her to continue. Tang Yu continued. Secondly, I'm impressed that you dared to reject Bao Yunfeng's recruitment in Xiantian City and killed him instead. There's nothing to admire. I just don't want to be associated with the 4 mounted bandits, Su Zimo said casually. That's the key. Tang Yu raised her folding fan and pointed to the crowd that was gradually dispersing. I can guarantee that most cultivators in Xiantian City don't want to be associated with the 4 mounted bandits. However, no one dares to provoke them or resist. Every cultivator might want to be a righteous and indomitable person at the start. However, as time passes by, people's edges and corners will gradually fade, and they will eventually compromise in the face of cruel reality. In fact, they might even become the type of people that they once disdained and hated. However, you're different. Tang Yu's gaze finally landed on Su Zimo's face. Her eyes were clear and bright as she said softly, I can still see your edges and sharpness. In the cultivation world, there aren't many people who can persevere and advance courageously. You're one of them. After Tang Yu said that, Ji Chengtian and the others were the ones who felt the most emotional. As Tang Yu said, they hated the four mounted bandits to the core, and could not be bothered to be associated with them. However, when Bao Yunfeng came to recruit them earlier on, they felt as though a burden had been lifted off their shoulders, and they wanted to go against their conscience and submit. Su Zimo pursed his lips and said in a self-deprecating manner, "Most people like me don't live long. That's why I'm here to help you." Tang Yu smiled. Looking at the rippling light in Tang Yu's eyes, Su Zimo was momentarily distracted and a strange feeling surged in his heart. Hurriedly he changed the topic and asked, "You said that you value my potential. What do you want me to do?" "That's right." Tang Yu nodded. "Right now, Xintian City is filled with experts of many factions gathered for an ancient sect ruin. At that time I hope that you can help Elixir Yang sect. Sect ruin." When they heard those words, the eyes of Ji Chengtian and the others lit up. The opportunities within the sect ruin were much greater than that of perfected Jindan's cave abode, and the treasures within would definitely be more as well. Furthermore, cultivators of the immortal sect's glass palace, fiend sect's malevolent earth sect and unorthodox sects were all gathered here. The sect ruin was definitely not simple. Suddenly Uncle Yang said, "That's all for later. Let's talk about it after you survive." Pondering for a moment, Su Zimo said, "I'll give you an answer tomorrow morning." "All right." Tang Yu nodded and was about to turn to leave when Xiaoning suddenly stood out. Blushing slightly, she asked, "Why, young Master Tang? How did you tell that I'm an elixir refinement master?" When Tang Yu saw the shyness on Su Xiaoning's face, she froze for a moment before snickering internally. Coming before Xiaoning, she sized her up with a somewhat wanton and unreasonable gaze. "Sister, do you want to know?" Tang Yu leaned forward slightly with a bright smile and a frivolous tone. Flustered, Xiaoning lowered her head even more and her ears turned red. She actually forgot to reply. Ji Chengtian and the others looked at Su Zimo instinctively. In their opinion, if anyone dared to treat Xiaoning in such a manner, given this person's character, he would have attacked long ago. However, the strange thing was that Su Zimo did not move at all, merely shifting his gaze between Xiaoning and Tang Yu with a strange gaze. "He's so cute." Tang Yu could not help but reach out and stroke Xiaoning's cheeks gently. When they saw that, Ji Chengtian and the others were shocked. This was blatant flirting. How could they let this go? Xiaoning panicked as well and looked at Su Zimo instinctively. Suddenly, Su Zimo said, "Fellow Taoist, although your disguise is brilliant, there are still some flaws." "Female disguise?" Ji Chengtian and the others were momentarily stunned and looked at Tang Yu instinctively. Although Tang Yu was extremely beautiful with picturesque features, her Adam's apple was protruding and her chest was flat. How could anyone tell that she was a woman? Tang Yu asked instinctively, "What flaws?" Su Zimo came before Tang Yu and sized her up as well. His gaze was even more wanton, unreasonable and invasive as he asked with a fake smile, "Fellow Taoist, do you want to know?" It was a familiar scene and a familiar question. Tang Yu's cheeks flushed and she looked flustered. Instinctively, she wanted to retreat but stopped herself. "Although the fragrance of your virginity is faint, you can't hide it from me." Su Zimo cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness and had already cleared his nose orifice. He was much more sensitive to auras than others. However, now that the two of them were extremely close and Su Zimo said such words in front of everyone, it sounded flirtatious and flirtatious. Embarrassed and furious, Tang Yu's expression changed several times before she stomped her feet and turned to leave. However, she had only taken a few steps when she turned around indignantly and glared at Su Zimo fiercely, gritting her teeth. "You lecher!" Chapter 369. Seeing Tang Yu's reaction and the blush on this beautiful young master's face, Ji Chengtian and the others were enlightened. Initially, Tang Yu was mischievous and wanted to tease Xiaoning. However, she was bullied by Su Zimo instead. Everyone suppressed their laughter and looked at Tang Yu and Su Zimo. Although Tang Yu was dressed as a man, she was a woman after all and was thin-skinned. How could she take everyone's teasing gazes? Raising her head, she turned to leave in a huff. Xiaoning looked at Tang Yu's departing back view with a dazed gaze and did not recover for a long time. "Xiaoning, don't think too much." Su Zimo coughed gently and patted Xiaoning on the shoulder. Turning to look at Su Zimo, Xiaoning frowned slightly and asked in disbelief, "Is young Master Tang really a woman?" Su Zimo nodded. Sigh. Xiaoning sighed gently and could not conceal the disappointment in her eyes. Su Zimo smiled bitterly to himself. Xiaoning was at the age where a young girl was in love for the first time. To think that the person who moved her heart would be a woman. Thankfully, the two of them had not known each other for long, and there was nothing more after he pointed it out. Before long, Xiaoning recovered and came before Su Zimo, saying seriously, "Brother, I want to join Elixir Yang sect." "Why?" Although Su Zimo had already vaguely guessed the reason, he still asked. Xiaoning said, "If there's a place in Tianhuang mainland with an elixir recipe that can increase one's lifespan, it must be an Elixir Yang sect. I want to give it a try." Indeed, it was as Su Zimo had expected. In reality, Xiaoning's greatest motivation and reason for becoming an elixir refinement master was to learn and refine elixirs that could increase one's lifespan. Their elder brother, Su Hong, was only a mortal and could not cultivate. He had less than 100 years of lifespan. Xiaoning wanted to increase her elder brother's lifespan so that he could live on as much as possible. That was why she chose to become an elixir refinement master. However, in the cultivation world, the rarest type of elixir was one that could increase one's lifespan. Not to mention the Azure Frost sect, such a pill had never appeared in the entire Great Zhou dynasty's territory, let alone the pill formula. It is a rare chance. Ning doesn't want to give it up. In reality, Su Zimo hoped that Xiaoning would join Elixir Yang sect as well. Firstly, the enmity between him and Blood Crow Palace was extremely deep. When he returned to the sect, it was very likely that he would experience a life and death calamity. If Xiaoning joins the Pill Yang sect, she will be able to avoid this calamity. Secondly, Elixir Yang sect was one of the 4 unorthodox groups. It had a strong foundation and was not weak. It was far from what Azure Frost sect could compare to and was suitable for Xiaoning's path of cultivation. Su Zimo said, "All right, I'll get Night Spirit to accompany you." After all, Su Zimo did not know much about Elixir Yang sect. He would only feel more assured if Night Spirit was by Xiaoning's side. Su Zimo turned around and looked at Ji Qingtian and the others. After pondering for a moment, he said in a deep voice, "I'll stay in Xintian City for the time being. You guys recuperate and rest before leaving this place as soon as possible." Little Fatty frowned and shouted, "Bro, we'll leave together if we leave together. We'll stay together if we stay." "That's right," Ji Qingtian nodded as well. Su Zimo waved it off. "I'm the target of the 3 mounted bandits. If I leave with you guys, none of us will be able to escape. I'm strong enough to protect myself. However, you guys will only die for nothing if you stay in the city. There's no need to be impulsive." Ji Qingtian and the others fell silent. They knew that Su Zimo was speaking the truth. The 3 mounted bandits had 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators, and at least hundreds of 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators under them. Given the strength of Ji Qingtian and the others, they would not be able to survive the attacks of hundreds of desperados even if they were in peak condition. Right now, they were of little help to Su Zimo and were even a burden to him. Leaving Su Zimo in Xintian City might be the best choice for them. In reality, Su Zimo did not have no chance of winning against 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. As long as he released his blood qi, his strength would rise to another level with the help of his demonic qi, and he would definitely be able to fight against 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. However, that way, he would also become a target for everyone and attract even stronger enemies. In fact, he might even be surrounded by all the cultivators of Xintian City. However, if he were to hide his demonic qi and only channel his bloodline, Su Zimo would only be able to fight evenly against 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators with Blood Quencher's help. It would be extremely difficult to defeat or even kill 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. Unless he could clear his mouth, eye and 7 orifices within a short period of time and attain lesser mastery of the orifice clearing section. However, that was not realistic. In other words, Su Zimo's only chance was to hold out against the attacks of the 3 mounted bandits for 15 minutes and wait for Elixir Yang sect's help. 15 minutes. Su Zimo murmured softly and a cold glint flashed through his eyes as he began cultivating. The next morning Tang Yu did not appear. An Elixir Yang sect disciple came to ask about Su Zimo's decision. "I'll stay." Su Zimo replied before looking at Su Xiaoning. Xiaoning will return with you. Please pass on the message to young Master Tang that I hope he can take good care of her. The Elixir Yang sect disciple smiled gently. Young Master already expected that and asked me to pass on the message to you beforehand. He'll definitely protect Xiaoning well, don't worry. Also, here are the recovery elixirs that senior brother gave you guys. You might be able to use them. Before leaving, the Elixir Yang sect disciple tossed a storage bag to Su Zimo. There were many jade bottles inside that contained different types of elixirs. Su Zimo took a quick glance and did not notice any perfect-grade elixirs. Hence, he passed them all to Jichintan and the others. Accompanied by the Night Spirit, Xiaoning left with the Elixir Yang sect disciple. Su Zimo continued cultivating. In such a pressing situation, the fifth spirit meridian in his body was slowly appearing. There was a chance that he could unlock it in the next few days. With the help of the recovery elixirs given by Tang Yu, the injuries of Ji Changtian and the others healed extremely quickly. After another day, everyone was mostly healed. This morning, Su Zimo said in a deep voice, "Senior brother Ji, you guys should leave today. The 3 mounted bandits will return at any moment and it'll be too late if you delay things." All right, Ji Changtian nodded without hesitation. Lung Ro, Little Fatty and Shi Jian stood up one after another and bade farewell to Su Zimo as well. Along the way, the 3 of them were silent, as though each of them had their own thoughts. After leaving Xiantian City and standing at the south gate, Little Fatty suddenly stopped in his tracks and turned around. "Senior brother Ji, sister Lung Ro and silly Jian, I intend to roam the ancient battlefield alone from now on. Let's part ways here." "I'm not silly," Shi Jian muttered. Lung Ro nodded with an indifferent expression. "All right." Ji Chengtian smiled. "I had the same intention as well. After today's farewell, I don't know when we'll meet again. Everyone take care." "Take care." Everyone cupped their fists. Ji Chengtian, Lung Ro and Little Fatty split in 3 different directions and left on their swords. Before long they disappeared from sight, leaving Shi Jian on the spot. Scratching his head, Shi Jian chose a random direction and sprinted off in huge strides. Chapter 370. The reason why Su Zimo stayed in Xiantian City was partly because he wanted to settle his feud with the 3 mounted bandits. At the same time, he was curious about the sect ruin that Tang Yu mentioned. The sect ruin must be extraordinary for so many major factions of Tianhuang mainland to gather here. Of course, the prerequisite for him to explore the sect ruin was that he had to have a firm foothold in Xiantian City. The battle with the 4 mounted bandits was unavoidable. The moment Su Zimo killed Bao Yunfeng, he had no intention of being nice with the 4 mounted bandits. Against such vicious and murderous people, Su Zimo was not going to go against his conscience and submit to them just because they were strong. If he felt indignant, he would get rid of that indignance and settle his grudges with a bang. The worst outcome would be him exposing his demonic cultivation. At most, he would flip the world upside down. For the next few days, Su Zimo did not move at all and sat in the open at a street corner without any distracting thoughts, cultivating silently like an old monk in meditation. On the 3rd day, the 5th spirit meridian in Su Zimo's body appeared and stabilized completely. Spirit energy surged within it with a majestic aura. Su Zimo's breakthrough did not cause much of a reaction in Xiantian City. After all, to most cultivators, there was no difference whether Su Zimo was at 4 or 5 Meridian Foundation Establishment. In fact, even if he was at 6 Meridian Foundation Establishment, it would not affect the outcome much. For most cultivators, they were merely waiting to watch a show. Everyone wanted to know how the 3 mounted bandits were going to torture Su Zimo given their temperament and methods. They also wanted to know how many innocent cultivators would be implicated and buried with him. As time passed by, it meant that the return of the 3 mounted bandits was approaching and the atmosphere in Xiantian City was turning increasingly stifling. This day, dark clouds loomed over the city and thunder rumbled. It was as though the skies were splashed with a thick layer of ink as dark clouds rumbled and rumbled. The air was filled with moisture and a downpour was imminent. On the east side of Xiantian City, in a well-preserved residence, a handsome man in luxurious robes stood with his hands behind his back. Standing at the door, he raised his head slightly and looked at the dark clouds in the skies with clear eyes like glass. A cultivator rushed in from the outside. He had a sect badge on his waist, which was exactly the same as the badge on the waist of the man from Hua Manor. Upon closer inspection, one could vaguely make out 2 words glass. Greetings, Senior Brother Pei. The Glass Palace disciple arrived before the luxurious man and bowed slightly. There's news that the 3 mounted bandits have returned to the city. Yes, the man in luxurious robes responded. His expression was normal as he continued to look up at the sky. That person continued, I heard that Elixir Yang sect is making a huge move. Young Master Tang Yu is leading a group of Elixir Yang sect cultivators to the vicinity of that mansion. I wonder what their intentions are. Fu, extending his palm, the luxurious robed man looked down at his slender fingers with a look of mockery as he remarked indifferently, the 4 mounted bandits are jackal, wolf, tiger and leopard. Now that the leopard is dead, the remaining 3 beasts must have gone mad. Anyone who provokes them at a time like this will only be asking for trouble. Our goal is the Elixir Pool sect ruins. There's no need to expend our strength on that. As for that Su whatever, he's just overestimating himself and trying to stop a chariot. West of Xintian City, within a palace, a black-robed cultivator sat boldly in the middle with a bone spear placed horizontally on his knees. Although his eyes were closed, there was a malevolent aura between his brows. Fiend air, the 3 mounted bandits have returned to the city. Got it, the black-robed cultivator replied casually without opening his eyes. Almost at the same time, Puppet Sect, Chiguramon, all the factions in Xintian City, heard the news and countless gazes turned towards the long street. Before long, a torrential rain poured down. Lightning flashed in the firmaments like a sea, as though it was about to devour the ancient city. The rain was heavy and rapid. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo's green robes were drenched. Even so, he remained seated on the spot with a straight back and eyes shut, looking indifferent, as though he was oblivious to it. Not far away, Tang Yu looked at the green figure at the corner of the street with a dazed gaze. After a moment, she regained her clarity and glanced sideways. Uncle Liang, do you think he can last 15 minutes? It'll be difficult. Uncle Liang shook his head. Notwithstanding the strength of the 3 mounted bandits, just the thousands of desperados under them are enough to blast him to smithereens. My brother will definitely be able to do it. Beside Tang Yu, Su Xiaoning clenched her fists and said resolutely. Beside Xiaoning, Night Spirit sprawled quietly, protecting her silently. On the long street, the rain was heavier and the wind was stronger. Amidst the wind and rain, the faint sound of hooves could be heard. Initially, it was faintly discernible, but gradually, it became clearer. Gradually, the sound of hooves was thunderous. Even the wind and rain could not mask the surging killing intent at the end of the long street. Vaguely, 3 figures appeared in the hazy rain and approached. It was the 3 mounted bandits. The ancient remnant beasts that the 3 of them sat on let out heavy panting sounds. Their eyes were bloodshot and they emitted a ferocious aura as they glared at the corner of the street. Following closely behind the 3 of them was a dense horde of armored horses, whistling as they charged forward. At a single glance, there were more than 1,000 of them. 1,000 desperados coupled with 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. This was a force that could not be ignored even in the ancient battlefield, let alone in Xintian City. In reality, top factions like Glass Palace and Malevolent Earth Sect were even stronger than the 4 mounted bandits. But now, a few factions were gathered in Xintian City, and were competing for the Elixir Pool sect ruins that were about to appear. None of them were willing to provoke the 4 mounted bandits lest they suffer losses and be disadvantaged in the fight for the Elixir Pool sect ruins. At the corner of the street, Su Zimo's clothes were already drenched and his black hair was stuck together. He looked like a drowned rat and was in a wretched state. 1,000 feet, 500 feet. The 3 mounted bandits were getting closer and Su Zimo could even smell the stench coming from the ancient remnant beasts that the 3 of them were sitting on. However, Su Zimo did not move. It was only when the 3 mounted bandits were within 300 feet of him that Su Zimo suddenly opened his eyes. Unknowingly, a moonlight-colored gigantic bow had appeared in his hands. He drew the bow and notched an arrow. The bow was like a full moon and the arrow was like a shooting star. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The sound of arrows tearing through the air almost formed a single line. The bow was the moon concealment bow, a quasi-connate spirit weapon. When the 5 spirit patterns on the gigantic bow in Su Zimo's hands lit up, Lang Tan felt uneasy. The next moment, a cold beam of light appeared before his eyes and arrived instantly. The speed of that arrow was way too fast, and any ordinary 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator would have died for sure. However, Lang Tan's countless life and death experiences in the forest allowed him to react much faster than ordinary cultivators. In a flash, Lang Tan tilted his head slightly. A cold beam of light brushed past his cheek, causing blood to splatter. It was a close shave. He dodged it. However, before Lang Tan could heave a sigh of relief, his eyelids twitched as he caught sight of another cold beam of light shooting towards his glabella. The second arrow arrived without giving him a chance to react at all. It was a chain of arrows. Lang Tan felt his scalp prickle and his hair stand on end. He was already extremely lucky to be able to dodge the first arrow. However, there was no way he could dodge the second arrow. Chapter 371. Clang. Chai Li, who was beside Lang Tan, was the first to react. Drawing the saber by his waist, spirit energy surged within his body and 7 spirit meridians lit up. Chai Li hollered and his killing intent surged as he slashed in reverse against the incoming arrow. The cold light dissipated and the arrow was sliced into 2. Su Zimo narrowed his gaze. The sharp arrow pierced through the air. How difficult would it be to intercept this arrow in midair? It was not only a test of one's eyesight and reaction, but also the accuracy of one's saber technique and timing. Given Su Zimo's bloodline, arm strength and the quasi-Khanate spirit weapon, Moon Concealment Bow, that arrow was extremely powerful, and even a top 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator would not be able to withstand it. However, as a 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator, Chai Li was completely fine after taking that arrow head-on. That was the terror of a 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. Be it in terms of reaction speed or strength, there was an obvious increase in every aspect. In reality, Chai Li was even more shocked at that moment. Although he managed to defend against the arrow, he could feel a slight tearing sensation between his thumb and index finger as his wrist went numb. What did that mean? It meant that the power of that arrow could even threaten him. Suddenly, Chai Li realized that Bao Yunfeng's death was not unjust. Before he could finish that thought, the third arrow arrived right after the second. The next moment, the 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th arrow. The 10 consecutive arrows engulfed the 3 mounted bandits. The rain poured down and arrows rained down. Chai Li and Hu Meng's expressions changed and they could no longer be bothered to save Lang Tan as they turned back to save themselves. With Chai Li blocking the arrow earlier on, Lang Tan already had a chance to catch his breath. He drew his saber with his left hand and crushed a protection talisman with his right. The moment the protection barrier was formed, a cold light descended. Snap! A series of cracks appeared on the protection barrier. It was pierced by a single arrow. Pust! Lang Tan's expression changed drastically. The killing power of that arrow was so frightening. His protection talisman was one of the highest grade 2 talismans and could even defend against a full-powered attack from a 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. To think that it would be pierced by a single arrow right now. Another dark light tore through the heavy rain and arrived before him. At that moment, with his protection talisman shattered, Lang Tan was forced into a corner and could only grip his saber with both hands, slashing forward with all his might. Clang! Sparks flew in all directions as the long saber chopped down on the incoming arrow. The saber was actually bounced back. The cold light paused for a moment before it continued forward, piercing through Lang Tan's chest. An arrow of blood shot out. Lang Tan fell from the back of the black demon wolf. The life in his body was cut off, and his eyes gradually dimmed. From the moment Su Zimo opened his eyes to the moment he took out the Moon Concealment Bow and knocked the arrow, everything happened almost at the same time. Su Zimo only made his move when the 3 mounted bandits were 300 feet away. If the distance was too far, the power of the arrow would be reduced and its speed would be slowed down, giving the opponent more time to react. The distance was too close, so the bow and arrow couldn't do much. To the 3 mounted bandits, 100 meters or so was almost instantaneous, but it was enough for Su Zimo. From a distance of 100 meters, 10 consecutive arrows were fired. Second brother Tan of the 4 mounted bandits died on the long street. The cultivators who saw this were all secretly shocked. If they were in Lang Tan's shoes, it would have been difficult for them to survive the 10 arrows as well. Not far away, Uncle Liang nodded. I have to say that this person's trump card is extremely strong, and can even threaten 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. However, its weakness is obvious as well. The power of the bow and arrow was limited to long-distance combat. Once they closed in, the bow and arrow would be useless. After the 10 arrows, the remaining 2 mounted bandits and 1,000-odd cavalrymen arrived before Su Zimo. At that moment, even a connate bow and arrow would be useless at that distance, let alone the fact that Su Zimo was only wielding a quasi-connate spirit weapon, the moon concealment bow. What followed next was close combat. The slightest mistake would result in his head being separated from his body. Die. The third brother, Hu Meng, was the first to arrive. He was carrying a gigantic one-legged bronze man with 4 spirit patterns shining on it. It looked like it weighed at least 5,000 kilograms as he swung it towards Su Zimo. Wherever the copper man passed, it had a frightening momentum and even created a blank area for the rain in midair. Ah, look. It's 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. Hu Meng has advanced to 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators as well. 7 spirit meridians lit up on the surface of Hu Meng's body. The remaining 2 of the 4 mounted bandits were both 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. Uncle Liang sighed. Su Zimo is unlucky. A 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator is enough to kill him. To think that Hu Meng has advanced to 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators as well. A man standing behind Tang Yu had a haughty expression as he crossed his arms and sneered. I don't think he can even last 10 breaths, let alone 15 minutes. That might not be the case, Tang Yu frowned. Xiaoning watched the battlefield intently and her trembling arms were a clear sign of her nervousness. Sensing something, Tang Yu glanced sideways and pulled Xiaoning's hand over, squeezing it gently to comfort her. Xiaoning took a deep breath and calmed down gradually. Clang! The moment Hu Meng charged forward, Su Zimo put away his moon concealment bow and withdrew a gigantic blood-colored saber from his storage bag. Blood Quencher was born with a torrential killing intent. Ooh, that copper man was a unique weapon. Although it wasn't agile, it had the advantage of being heavy and powerful. Furthermore, the facial features of the copper man were clear and lifelike, resembling an enraged Vajra that was ferocious and intimidating. During a fight, if a cultivator's gaze met it by accident, they would be smashed into meat paste without a corpse the moment they lost focus and the strength in their hands weakened. 10 arrows were shot consecutively and Su Zimo channeled his bloodline with every single one of them, giving it his all. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to kill one of the 3 mounted bandits head-on. But now that Hu Meng was charging over, Su Zimo had just used up all his strength and had yet to recover. As such, he could only raise Blood Quencher in front of him and was forced to defend. Clang! The copper man collided against Blood Quencher and let out an ear-piercing sound of metal clashing endlessly. Su Zimo shuddered and staggered 3 steps back. Immediately after, Chai Li did not give Su Zimo any chance to catch his breath as he charged over on his black feather jackal, slashing horizontally towards Su Zimo's throat. Su Zimo raised his saber to block once more. Clang! Su Zimo's body shuddered once more, as though he was struck by an irresistible force. He retreated rapidly and his feet were stuck to the ground, creating 2 ravines that were filled with rainwater in the blink of an eye. The difference in strength is way too great. He's not a match for them at all. That's right. Once the 1,000-odd cultivators strike at the same time, that man will die instantly. I reckon that his organs are already injured from the 2 head-on clashes with Chai Li and Hu Meng. He's merely holding on. Both parties had only exchanged blows for a short period of time, and many clues could be made out. On the surface, Su Zimo was indeed disadvantaged. However, in reality, that was merely a facade created by the fact that Su Zimo was exhausted from drawing his bow continuously and the 2 of them took advantage of his weakness. In fact, when he received Chai Li's second slash head-on, Su Zimo's killing intent surged and he almost could not suppress the demonic chi in his body and burst forth with his power of blood chi to counterattack. Chapter 372. Kill them. Chai Li rode on the back of the black feather jackal with a vicious gaze that shone with a cruel glint. Raising his arm, he soared into the air and charged towards Su Zimo. Roar! Roar! On the ground, the black bane wolf, black feather jackal and Rahu tiger opened their mouths and let out deafening roars. The three spirit demons were ancient remnant beasts and exuded endless demonic chi. They were tall with sharp claws and fangs. All of them were at the peak of Foundation Establishment realm. The three ancient remnant beasts split into three different directions and lunged towards Su Zimo. It was especially the case for the black bane wolf. It had witnessed its master being killed by this green-robed cultivator, and the only thing it wanted to do right now was to rip this person's throat into shreds. In midair, Chai Li wielded a saber and descended with Hu Meng, who was wielding a copper man. More than 1,000 desperados had already charged over and surrounded the place. Su Zimo had no way out at all. Kill! 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 The 1,000-odd desperados roared and attacked one after another. Some summoned flying swords, some released spirit arts, some wielded sabers and axes. When they saw that, the spectators shook their heads and sighed internally. Even legacy disciples of top factions such as Glass Palace and Malevolent Earth Sect might not be able to escape unscathed against an attack as such, let alone Su Zimo, who was only at 5 Meridian Foundation Establishment. Tang Yu's gaze was bright and had been fixed on Su Zimo the entire time. To her surprise, she could not see any hint of panic or fear on Su Zimo's face. In fact, there seemed to be a hint of excitement in his bright eyes. Su Zimo's lips curled into a sinister smile. He was smiling. Just what sort of a person are you? Tang Yu frowned slightly. She truly could not understand how Su Zimo could still smile in such a life-and-death situation. Ha! 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 Suddenly, Su Zimo opened his mouth and laughed into the skies, letting out 3 continuous bursts of laughter from the depths of his throat. As soon as he finished speaking, the curtain of rain around him seemed to be shaken by an invisible force and suddenly spread out in all directions. The surrounding desperados trembled all over. When this voice entered their ears, it was as if it could shake their brains. They actually felt a little dizzy. Everyone's attacks paused slightly. Right then, Su Zimo's eyes lit up as his figure flashed and he arrived before the 3 ancient remnant beasts before Chai Li and Hu Meng arrived. In the heavy rain, Su Zimo's afterimages were left behind. After pausing for a moment, they were washed away by the rain. You 3 beasts want to take my life? Su Zimo laughed loudly, not concealing the contempt in his eyes. The blood in his body burst forth, and the sound of waves, thunder, and tigers and leopards were mixed in, causing one's heart to tremble. Facing the 3 ancient remnant beasts that were charging at him, Su Zimo swung his saber in reverse. The gigantic blade shone with a crimson light, enveloping the Rahu tiger and the black feather jackal. Immediately after, Su Zimo strode forward and punched the black bane wolf's head with his left fist. The black bane wolf's eyes shone with a ferocious glint. Without dodging or retreating, it extended its sharp fangs and claws towards Su Zimo's throat. The black bane wolf was much larger than Su Zimo. Under normal circumstances, before Su Zimo's punch could even land on the black bane wolf, the latter's claws would have already crushed Su Zimo's throat. The black bane wolf's eyes shone with excitement. It was as though it could see the scene of this human being torn apart by its fangs and claws. All of a sudden, a change happened on the battlefield. The moment the black bane wolf lunged forward, Su Zimo's tendons and bones rang at the same time. His tendons stretched like a bowstring and let out a series of vibrating sounds. Pang! 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 Su Zimo's arm expanded and arrived first. The gigantic greenish-black seal conjured by his fist smashed against the black bane wolf's head first. The sound of bones cracking could be heard. Among the spirit demons, the wolf race was known for having copper heads and iron bones. In other words, the toughest part of the wolf race was their heads. But now, even as an ancient remnant beast, the black bane wolf's head was smashed by Su Zimo's fist. With a tragic cry, it died on the spot. If the black bane wolf was described as having a head of copper and bones of steel, Su Zimo's fists were like diamond glass, indestructible and extremely tough. After killing the black bane wolf with a single punch, the black feather jackal and Rahu tiger retreated against the sharpness of Blood Quencher. At that moment, the attacks of the other cultivators arrived. The 2 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment cultivators who posed the greatest threat to Su Zimo, Chai Li, and Hu Meng charged forward once more with spirit weapons in their hands. A bloody battle had erupted. Clang! Clang! Su Zimo slapped his storage bag and summoned 18 supreme-grade flying swords, conjuring the candlelight sword formation right away. This time round, the candlelight sword formation was not attacking but defending with all its might. The attacks of more than 1,000 desperados were way too dense, and spirit perception alone was no longer enough. Cling! Clang! Clang! The gigantic circular sword formation danced in the air, blocking the incoming flying swords. It was fortunate that Su Zimo had advanced to 5 Meridian Foundation establishment, and his spirit energy had increased tremendously. Otherwise, the candlelight sword formation would have collapsed quickly against the attacks of so many spirit weapons and arts. Swash! Su Zimo's body moved nimbly as he weaved through the dense attacks. Dodging Chai Li and Hu Meng's attacks, he charged into the crowd and swung Blood Quencher left and right. Poof! 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 Su Zimo did not know any saber techniques at all. However, his bloodline was strong and his strength was unparalleled. Coupled with the sharpness and weight of Blood Quencher, it was a complete mess wherever it passed. The bodies of those cultivators could not withstand the blood beam on the saber at all. As long as they were struck by Blood Quencher, they would be sliced into 2 on the spot and blood would splatter everywhere. Even if some of the cultivators managed to defend against Blood Quencher with the help of their spirit weapons, they would be sent flying by the shocking force of the saber. Their organs would be smashed into smithereens while they were still in midair. Clang! Clang! Su Zimo swung Blood Quencher and clashed head-on with Chai Li and Hu Meng once more. However, this time round Su Zimo did not retreat at all. His bloodline seemed to be boiling as he roared and strode forward, slashing twice more. Clang! Clang! Chai Li and Hu Meng's spirit energy churned wildly in their dantians as they withstood Su Zimo's 2 slashes. Although their expressions were unchanged, the killing intent in their eyes intensified. Swoosh! An evil gust of wind blew. The black feather jackal took advantage of the moment when Su Zimo was clashing with Chai Li and Hu Meng. It lunged forward and reached out with its sharp claws, grabbing at Su Zimo's back silently. If that claw connected, Su Zimo's heart would be ripped out. Without turning back, Su Zimo swung his arm in reverse. Just now, his arm that was as strong as a stone pillar suddenly turned limp like an elephant's trunk. With a thud, he swung his arm out and struck the black feather jackal's head. Crack! 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 Right in front of everyone, the black feather jackal's head spun a few rounds around its neck before coming to a stop. Its neck was completely broken and it died on the spot. Seizing the opportunity, the Rahu tiger lunged forward and bit viciously at Su Zimo's neck. Just as Su Zimo no longer had any space to dodge, a pair of gigantic wings suddenly extended from his back. They shone with a bedazzling spirit light. Flapping his spirit wings, Su Zimo soared into the air without anything beneath his feet. Shing! He was still a step too late. Su Zimo's left leg was scratched by the Rahu tiger's claws, and there were a few holes in his robes with faint traces of blood within. He was injured. The battle lasted for less than a minute and Su Zimo was already injured. Furthermore, as time passed by, Su Zimo's situation would only get more dangerous. The rain was still pouring without stopping. Chapter 373. If it was any other ordinary cultivator, their legs would have been severed by now. However, Su Zimo's physique was strong and the moment the Rahu tiger's claws pierced in, it was met with immense resistance and merely left a couple of wounds that were neither deep nor shallow. The muscles on his legs squirmed and the wounds on both sides of his body stuck together, stopping the bleeding instantly. The strength of his physique was not only reflected in his strength, his regeneration ability that even ancient remnant beasts could not compare to increased Su Zimo's endurance in combat. Su Zimo licked his lips without any hint of panic in his eyes. Instead, there was a ferocious glint. Flapping his spirit wings, Su Zimo's speed reached its limits and he turned into a streak of light, charging into the crowd instantly. Swinging Blood Quencher, a layer of blood was formed around him. Cling! Clang! Countless spirit weapons shattered into pieces. Many figures fell onto the mud of the long street one after another, coughing out mouthfuls of blood. It was clear that they were not going to survive. Swoosh! Hu Meng descended from the skies with his copper one-legged man in hand. An evil gust of wind blew as he smashed it towards Su Zimo's head. There were also sword shadows and saber beams in the surroundings. Su Zimo had no room to dodge at all. He could only rely on the spiraling candlelight sword formation to protect his surroundings. Taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo spun around and slashed upwards with his saber. Clang! The sound of metal clashing echoed deafeningly. Not to mention Su Zimo, who was in the center. Even the many desperados around him felt a slight pain in their eardrums. Su Zimo shuddered and the green stone beneath his feet shattered. His feet sank deeply into the ground and he suddenly became shorter. This time round it was clear that Su Zimo was at a disadvantage. In reality, Su Zimo was definitely not weaker than Hu Meng in a one-on-one fight, even if the other party was a 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment body-tempering warrior. However, apart from Hu Meng, there were more than 1,000 desperados, an ancient remnant beast and another 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment cultivator around Su Zimo. Under such circumstances, it was already fortunate that Su Zimo was able to hold on. It was just like that night in Mo's spirit weapon workshop when 2 old perfected Jindan had come to assassinate Su Zimo. In reality, Jinren Jindan's strength was enough to kill him. However, with the help of Night Spirit, Su Zimo made use of his opponent's underestimation of him, his grasp of timing, his grasp of the environment, and the combination of the blood-bone palm and many other factors to kill Jinren Jindan. In a real fight, Su Zimo was no match for perfected Jindan, even in his demon form. The Tao of Alchemy was the first step in breaking free from the shackles of heaven and earth. It was no small matter. Even though Taoist Master Jindan was past his prime, he still wasn't someone a Foundation Establishment cultivator could match. His strength and dignity were still there, and he couldn't be blasphemed. Now, even if Su Zimo activated his bloodline and was able to compete with Chai Li and Hu Meng in terms of strength, he could only fall into a disadvantage under the siege of so many desperados. Whoosh! A cold glint shot over. Su Zimo felt his vision turn white and he could not tell where Chai Li's saber was. This was purely a brilliant saber technique. If Su Zimo had unlocked one of the 7 orifices, the eye orifice, his eyesight would have increased tremendously, and he would definitely be able to see through illusions and determine the location of Chai Li's saber. But now, Su Zimo knew nothing about saber techniques and could only retreat against that saber. This retreat immediately caused the original defense to become full of flaws. At that moment, he was heavily surrounded and his spirit perception was almost useless no matter how strong it was. Even if Su Zimo could sense the omnipresent danger, he could not avoid it. The attacks around him were like a downpour from the skies. It was dense, sharp and suffocating. Although he managed to avoid Chai Li's fatal saber, Su Zimo had a few wounds on his body in the blink of an eye. Fresh blood flowed and was washed away by the rain. He won't be able to last much longer if this continues. Body-tempered cultivators like him will definitely get weaker after losing too much blood and will only get worse. What a pity. That person does have the strength to go against the 4 mounted bandits. Sigh. When she heard the discussions in the crowd, Tang Yu was motionless with a hint of worry in her eyes. Su Xiaoning's gaze landed on the green figure that was fighting in the crowd without retreating. Pursing her lips tightly, her vision was gradually blurred by a layer of misty rain. The ground beneath Su Zimo's feet was littered with corpses in a shocking manner. Even with 2 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment cultivators, and more than 1,000 desperados attacking him, Su Zimo managed to kill more than 100 Meridian Foundation Establishment cultivators with his terrifying melee combat strength. The green robes on his body were almost dyed blood red. Su Zimo, surrender now and I can still leave your corpse intact. Chai Li's sinister voice sounded. Haha. Su Zimo burst into laughter. Chai Li, even if you surrender now, I won't leave your corpse intact. I'll definitely chop off your head. Su Zimo, I'm going to grind your bones to ashes and take revenge for my brother. Hu Meng hollered. Kill him. Kill him. Many desperados were already in a killing frenzy as they swarmed forward. As time passed by, the wounds on Su Zimo's body increased. Some of them had just healed when they ruptured once more in the intense battle. The long street was already dyed red with blood. Even the torrential downpour could not wash away the blood stains on the green stones. In everyone's eyes, Su Zimo was already staggering and his movement technique was no longer as agile as before. The candlelight sword formation that he conjured was also on the verge of collapse after countless attacks, and could dissipate at any moment. In fact, Su Zimo's spirit wings had already dissipated due to the exhaustion of spirit energy. He was at the end of his rope. Uncle Liang shook his head. That lad is dead for sure within 50 breaths. Tang Yu frowned and glanced sideways at the many cultivators behind her. Right now she could order Elixir Yang sect to join the battle. However, their strength would definitely be severely depleted if they were to fight against the 4 mounted bandits at this juncture. Their chances of fighting for the Elixir Pool sect ruins would be even slimmer in the future. Personally, she wanted to help Su Zimo. In public, she was the commander of Elixir Yang sect this time round and every single decision was related to the interests of the sect. There was no way she could join the battle at this juncture. Heis! Tang Yu's eyes dimmed as she sighed internally. The omnipresent pain stimulated Su Zimo's nerves repeatedly, and his mind was incomparably clear. I've still been forced to this extent in the end. The demonic chi within Su Zimo's body rumbled and his eyes shone with a scarlet glint. Once he released his power of blood chi. Although Su Zimo was still in his human form, his demonic chi would shroud him and he would transform into an ancient demon. His strength would increase exponentially, and he would be able to kill 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. That's good as well. I'll go on a killing spree today. Just as Su Zimo made up his mind to stop hiding his demonic cultivation and release his power of blood chi with all his might, a familiar voice sounded from outside the battlefield. First you told me not to be impulsive. Today I'm going to be impulsive. Immediately after, another voice sounded from another direction. Zimo, I'm not going to be a burden to you this time round. The moment he said that, a cold female voice sounded from not far away. I've refined a few new spirit talismans and was just about to try them out. This is the right time. Chapter 374. When he heard the 3 familiar voices, Su Zimo's eyes shone brightly. It's them. Tang Yu's expression changed and she was slightly stunned. The 3 of them were the cultivators that followed Su Zimo into the city initially. Apart from Ji Chengtian, who was at 6 Meridian Foundation establishment, the other 2 were only at 4 Meridian Foundation establishment. Back then, Tang Yu felt that it was a wise decision for them to leave Xiantian City. Given their cultivation, they would have been reduced to ashes by the 1,000-odd desperados if they stayed in Xiantian City. However, Tang Yu had not expected that 3 of the 4 of them who left Xiantian City would return. The haughty man behind Tang Yu sneered. How foolish of them to return to Xiantian City despite knowing that they're going to die. Although many cultivators present had the same thoughts, those words were extremely grating when they came out of their mouths. Yan Jun. Tang Yu frowned slightly and turned back to reprimand softly. Although the cultivator named Yan Jun was also an Elixir Yang sect disciple, he was a disciple of the Battle Hall, and was at 7 Meridian Foundation establishment. As such, Tang Yu could not reprimand him too harshly. Yan Jun harumphed and said nothing more. Suddenly, a soft yet firm voice sounded from the side. This isn't stupidity, this is camaraderie. Xiaoning had a timid nature and would bury her grievances deep in her heart. It took a lot of courage for her to say something like that. However, she was infuriated at that moment. For some reason, her blood rushed to her head as she gripped her fists tightly and glared at Yanju. Someone like you will never understand camaraderie. Camaraderie my *s. Are we going to die together? Yanjun scoffed and looked at Su Xiaoning mockingly. Curling his lips, he remarked coldly, if you understand camaraderie, why don't you go and die, Yanjun was at 7 Meridian Foundation establishment after all. For him to be able to cultivate to this level, his hands were stained with blood after entering the ancient battlefield. Being stared at by Yanjun's cold eyes, Xiaoning felt timid and instinctively took half a step back. Right then, Night Spirit, who was initially sprawled on the ground, opened his eyes. That pair of pitch-black eyes emitted a faint light that flickered between bright and dark. In an instant, the surrounding temperature plummeted. All the cultivators present, including Uncle Liang, felt a sinister chill that sent chills down their spines. It was as though they were targeted by some ancient and ferocious living being. and could be torn into pieces at any moment. Uncle Yang was greatly shocked. Yan Jun, who was originally arrogant, felt his hair stand on end and goosebumps rise all over his body. An unprecedented shadow of death loomed over him, causing his entire body to turn cold. At this moment, Xiaoning sensed Night Spirit's actions. She quickly stretched out her hand and patted Night Spirit's head, hinting it not to act rashly. After all, Elixir Yang sect was the only sect in Xintian City that could support Su Zimo. If Night Spirit were to kill Yan Jun, it would be equivalent to pushing Elixir Yang sect to the opposite side of Su Zimo. Night Spirit closed his eyes again. The chilliness in the surroundings instantly disappeared. Just now, everything seemed to be a figment of everyone's imagination that was fleeting. Many cultivators were confused and exchanged glances with lingering fear. Only a few people noticed that Night Spirit had opened his eyes just now. Uncle Liang looked at Night Spirit meaningfully before retracting his gaze. Shuddering, Yan Jun scanned his surroundings and heaved a sigh of relief when he did not discover anything. His expression relaxed slightly. On the long street. Senior brother Ji? Sister Leng Ro? Little Fatty's eyes flashed with surprise when he saw Ji Chengtian flapping his ethereal wings in midair, and Leng Ro charging into the battlefield from another direction. Ji Chengtian and Leng Ro had the same expression. This was a battle with a slim chance of survival and nobody could make decisions for others. The three of them did not know what the other party was thinking, and did not want to pressure the other party either. Therefore, they chose to part ways after leaving Xintian City. But now, the three of them were of the same mind and returned to Xintian City to fight alongside Su Zimo. It was a form of tacit understanding. Little Fatty wielded a gigantic axe that shone with 4 spirit lights and charged into the crowd diagonally, chopping down a desperado in front of him. 6 spirit meridians lit up on Little Fatty's bloated body. On the other side, Leng Ro threw out more than 10 talismans and summoned her flying sword. She charged into the battlefield and 6 spirit meridians lit up on her body as well. 2 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. Before the two of them left Xintian City, they were only at 4 Meridian Foundation establishment. There was only a single possibility for them to advance from 4 Meridian Foundation establishment to 6 Meridian Foundation establishment in such a short period of time. During this period of time, just like Su Zimo, Little Fatty, and Leng Ro broke through to 5 Meridian Foundation establishment and consumed the Meridian Unlocking Elixir to advance to 6 Meridian Foundation establishment in one go. Haha! A pair of spirit wings extended from Ji Chengtian's back, and he soared into the air. With a roar of laughter, 7 spirit meridians could be vaguely seen beneath his robes. 7 Meridian Foundation establishment. Ji Chengtian had broken through as well. Given Ji Chengtian's potential, there might be a chance for him to break through to 7 Meridian Foundation establishment through cultivation in the ancient battlefield. However, it was impossible for him to do so in such a short period of time. In other words, Ji Chengtian had made the same decision as Little Fatty and Leng Ro. Consume the Meridian Unlocking Elixir. The three of them exchanged glances and smiled in unison. The Meridian Unlocking Elixir was only effective the first time it was consumed, and none of them had intended to consume it at their current cultivation realm. But now, the three of them chose to consume the Meridian Unlocking Elixir without any discussion or communication for this battle. They gave up on a higher cultivation in life and death, just so that they could return for this battle. Su Zimo understood everything. The moment he saw the three of them return, he understood everything. However, at that moment, Su Zimo was agitated and his lips quivered, but he could not say anything. I'm back too. Right then, an honest-looking cultivator appeared on the battlefield. With a roar, he swung his metal rod and repelled 2 desperados. Silly Jian. When he heard that voice, Little Fatty's heart skipped a beat as he turned back in disbelief. At that moment, the 4 of them who left Xintian City had all returned. When Su Zimo saw that, he felt a surge of warmth in his heart and the wounds on his body no longer hurt as much. There was no need for words or thanks. As long as he knew that the 4 of them did not leave and stood by his side to fight alongside him in his most dangerous moment, that was enough. Ha 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 ha. Finally, Su Zimo burst into laughter. Ji Chengtian was laughing, Leng Ro was laughing, Little Fatty was laughing, and Shi Jian was laughing foolishly as well. Amidst the flashes of swords and sabers, The 5 of them were like 5 drowned rats in a wretched state. However, they laughed wantonly, happily and carefreely. Some of them had tears in their eyes, and in the blink of an eye, they mixed with the rain and slid down their faces. "Silly Jian, you said that you're not silly. Why did you return?" Little Fatty asked. "I got lost," Shi Jian replied. Chapter 375. Bro, it's useless even if you want to chase us away now. Little Fatty burst into laughter. At that moment, Little Fatty, Shi Jian and Lung Ro had already charged into the battlefield and were heavily surrounded. Unless they killed all the desperados before them, it was impossible for them to leave even if they wanted to. Although Little Fatty, Lung Ro and Shi Jian were at 6 Meridian Foundation establishment, their strength was similar to the desperados around them. In fact, Little Fatty and Lung Ro had just advanced to 6 Meridian Foundation establishment and their foundations were unstable. In terms of strength, they could not compare to other 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. The moment the 3 of them charged into the battlefield, they were surrounded. Thankfully, Ji Chengtian was at 7 Meridian Foundation establishment and relied on the agility of ethereal wings to shuttle through the battlefield. Using his brilliant sword-wielding technique, he helped the 3 of them resolve multiple crises. The 4 of them gradually gathered together. There were a few times when Ji Chengtian wanted to charge out of the encirclement to help Su Zimo. However, the moment he was distracted, Shi Jian and the other 2 would be in danger. One would never be able to understand the terror of being surrounded by hundreds of desperados, unless they were personally involved. Attacks rained down from all directions like a torrential downpour. That Ji Chengtian has just advanced to 7 Meridian Foundation establishment, and can't unleash the true strength of a 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator. He's still a little weak at the end of the day. That's right. Even ants can kill an elephant with enough strength. The return of the 4 of them won't affect the situation much. The only difference is whether they die sooner or later. Many cultivators discussed fervently. Although the return of Ji Chengtian's group of 4 into the battlefield caused a slight change in the situation, no one was optimistic about them. After all, Su Zimo's side was way too few people. However, as time passed by, the way everyone looked at Ji Chengtian's group changed gradually. Ji Chengtian, Lung Ro, Little Fatty and Shi Jian were gathered together in a triangular formation. Ji Chengtian was the strongest and was one of the corners. As a talisman master, Lung Ro had an endless supply of talismans in her storage pouch. Moreover, they were quite powerful. She had an endless supply of defensive, offensive, and auxiliary talismans. Little Fatty and Shi Jian teamed up as the last corner. This triangular formation was extremely stable and indestructible. There were no obvious weaknesses, and it could be constantly changed. The 4 of them cooperated with each other seamlessly, and they actually managed to withstand the attacks of hundreds of desperados. On the contrary, around the 4 of them, desperados were constantly injured and dying. One had to know that Su Zimo had led them from the edge of the primordial battlefield all the way here. They had encountered too many dangers and battles. Along the way they fought and killed. They were all too familiar with this formation. "You guys go over there and kill those 4 for me," Chai Li quickly commanded. Soon only Chai Li and Hu Meng were left in front of Su Zimo. The appearance of Ji Chengtian and the other 3 successfully shared some of the pressure on Su Zimo and lured away the remaining desperados. At this moment, there was finally a slight change in the situation where the 4 mounted bandits were confident of victory. The outcome of this battle was starting to become unpredictable. Or rather, even if the 4 mounted bandits won in the end, it would be a Pyrrhic victory, and they would lose the strength to contest against the other factions for the Elixir Pool sect ruins. Hu Meng stood on the long street and looked at Su Zimo, who was completely covered in blood with a look of shock in his eyes. He truly could not imagine how someone with so many wounds could last till now. If he was in Su Zimo's shoes, he would have collapsed long ago with his head separated from his body. "Su Zimo, you're at the end of your tether right now. There are at least 30 wounds on your body and you'll bleed to death if you bleed. Stop holding on." Chai Li's voice was cold as he glared at Su Zimo. As long as Su Zimo revealed any weakness, Chai Li would definitely strike with a fatal blow. However, Chai Li was disappointed. Su Zimo's expression was still calm, and there was no hint of fatigue on his delicate face. However, he was much paler than before. The fighting spirit in his eyes became even hotter and even flashed with the light of excitement. Chai felt a little weak. The 4 mounted bandits shall be removed from your names today. Su Zimo smirked with a strong killing intent. Clang! Clang! Blood quencher buzzed and the sound of metal clashing filled the air. Su Zimo reared his head and howled into the skies. Striding forward, he waved his gigantic saber and enveloped Chai and Hu Meng with a torrential aura. He did not look like someone who was severely injured at all. Clang! Clang! Blood quencher collided with the bronze one-legged man and saber, causing sparks to fly and an ear-piercing sound that was still clear despite the rumbling thunder. Chai and Hu Meng shuddered and retreated half a step. This was the first time they had retreated since the start of the fight. Again! Su Zimo roared in laughter and strode forward. With a loud boom, a gigantic ravine appeared on the ground and the mud and stone on both sides rumbled. Blood quencher drew an arc in midair and a blood beam expanded, descending upon the 2 of them. Chai and Hu Meng had no way of dodging and could only take it head-on once more. Thud! 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 Suddenly, Chai and Hu Meng felt a dark cloud over their hearts. The commotion caused by this battle was way too great. More and more cultivators rushed over, and even a few of the top factions of Xintian City were alarmed. Successors of Puppet Sect and Chiguramon arrived one after another, and were slightly moved when they saw the tragic battle on the long street. East of Xintian City, a man in luxurious robes stood in front of a residence with his hands behind his back. Raising his head, he looked at the skies with narrowed eyes that were as clear as glass. Senior Brother Pei. A glass palace cultivator sped over in the rain and arrived before the man in luxurious robes, cupping his fists. The 4 mounted bandits have returned and a huge battle broke out on the long street. There's no victor yet. The man in luxurious robes was distracted and there was no emotion in his eyes, as though he did not hear anything. A moment later, the man in luxurious robes' expression changed and he lowered his head slowly. Looking at the glass palace cultivator before him, he asked with a frown, "There's no victor yet?" "Yes." The glass palace cultivator nodded. Lang Tan of the 4 mounted bandits was killed by Su Zimo right away. That man possesses a perfect spirit weapon and is extremely strong in melee combat. Later on, another 4 people returned and helped Su Zimo charge into the battlefield. Up till now, the outcome of the battle is still unclear. Su Zimo is currently fighting against 2 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators, Chai and Hu Meng. It's a draw. The 5 of them managed to hold out against more than 1,000 desperados. They're evenly matched against 2 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators? Interesting. The man in luxurious robes lowered his head and looked at his long, slender fingers, murmuring softly. A moment later, the man in luxurious robes' eyes flickered as though he had made a decision. Suddenly, he said, "Gather some men and follow me to take a look." Understood. At the same time, in a palace in the west of the city, a malevolent earth sect cultivator strode over and knelt before a black-robed cultivator, saying with a lowered head, "Fiend air." A bloody battle broke out on the long street and the 4 mounted bandits suffered heavy losses. Su Zimo is not dead yet, and the battle is still ongoing with an unpredictable outcome. Suddenly, the black-robed cultivator opened his eyes and a malevolent aura flashed across his body as he narrowed his gaze. He managed to hold out until now? After a moment of silence, the black-robed cultivator stood up and gripped the bone spear in front of him, saying coldly, "Let's go and take a look." The bloody battle on the long street had alarmed the entire Xintian city. Chapter 376. Dark clouds collided and lightning flashed from time to time, tearing the firmaments apart like electric snakes and dragons. The world flickered. There were many figures on the long street. The battle was reaching its climax and was getting increasingly tragic. No matter which side or which cultivator it was, their stamina was already at its limits. Jichengtian and the other 3 were already injured. Although the triangular formation was still around, it could not hold out for long. On the other side of the battlefield, Su Zimo was getting braver as he fought. He had managed to hold on until now with his strong bloodline and terrifying stamina, suppressing Chai Li and Hu Meng instead. The situation was still unclear. On the two battlefields, no matter which side won first, it would affect the direction of the entire battle. For Su Zimo, it was extremely easy for him to win this battle. He had one final trump card: Demon Transformation. After his Demon Transformation, the 2-7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators before him would definitely die. However, Demon Transformation would not only mean that Su Zimo would become the target of everyone, he would also have a difficult time in the ancient battlefield. Even if he returned to Tianhuang mainland, he would have to conceal his identity. Even Misty Peak would not take in an anomaly like him. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Su Zimo did not want things to come to this point. As the leader of the 4 mounted bandits, Chai Li understood the situation as well and suddenly shouted, "Spectating factions, as long as you're willing to help us kill the 5 of them, we swear once more that we'll help you guys fight for the Elixir Pool sect ruins." That's right. Hu Meng hollered as well, "We'll definitely reward any cultivator who's on our side. If anyone can kill Su Zimo, we're willing to repay them with Meridian unlocking elixirs." The moment he said that, there was an uproar. Initially, the cultivators of the factions were merely watching for a show, but now they were tempted. Look, Pei Chunyu of Glass Palace is here with his men. Over there, the fiend heir of malevolent earth sect, Shuiyang, is here as well. The bloody battle on the long street in Xintian City attracted the attention of various top factions, and the situation became even more complicated. Sensing the commotion around him, Su Zimo's eyes shone fiercely. A victor had to be decided as soon as possible. Otherwise, it was very likely that the 5 of them would become the sacrificial lambs in the game between the various powers. Other than his demon form, what other methods did he have to kill 2-7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators as quickly as possible? Su Zimo's mind raced. Suddenly, a thick bolt of lightning landed on the long street and actually smashed a huge hole in the ground. It was scorched black and flickered with lightning. This was the might of heaven and earth, and it was impossible for humans to contend against it. After a while, the sound of rolling thunder came from the end of the sky. A thought suddenly flashed through Su Zimo's mind. Without thinking too much, he subconsciously stepped forward. The bricks under his feet exploded, sending sand and stones flying everywhere. The massive rebound caused Su Zimo to soar into the air, raising Blood Quencher with both hands as he channeled the mental cultivation technique of the Void Thunder Manual. His blood tide surged along with rumbling thunder, forming a resonance with the lightning in the skies. Rumble! The sound of thunder became louder and came rolling from the end of the sky. It was as if there were 10,000 war chariots whistling through the sky. The momentum was terrifying. Crackle! The skies above Xintian City shone with endless lightning that was incomparably bright. In the blink of an eye, a sea of lightning was formed that shone with a divine light. Beneath that sea of lightning, Su Zimo's leap attracted everyone's attention. At that moment, Su Zimo was in the middle of the sea of lightning, as though he was the only true god in the world with an unparalleled might and a torrential aura. Snap! A thick blue bolt of lightning descended and landed on Blood Quencher instantly. Billions of lightning coiled around the scarlet saber, as though countless tiny snakes were wriggling and crawling in a terrifying manner. "Take my slash!" Su Zimo hollered with a thunderous voice that reverberated in all directions. Bathed in lightning, Su Zimo swung Blood Quencher with both arms and descended from the skies, enveloping Chai Li and Hu Meng instantly. That slash carried the might of heaven and earth and the power of thunder with a shocking aura. Before the saber descended, Chai Li and Hu Meng were already scared out of their wits and their faces were drained of blood. How could that slash be defended against by a human? It was clearly the wrath of thunder. Ah! With nowhere to retreat, Hu Meng could only roar and bite the tip of his tongue gently, spitting out a stream of essence blood that landed on the Copper Man's eyes. 2 beams of blood shot out from the Copper Man's eyes and its body shone brightly with spirit light. Gritting his teeth, Hu Meng swung his Copper Man and smashed it towards the incoming Blood Quencher. Boom! The weapons collided with a deafening bang, as though the entire world was quaking. Hu Meng's body bent and a gigantic crack appeared on the ground beneath his feet. After a momentary pause, Hu Meng shuddered and was coiled by lightning. His eyes dimmed as he spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. The copper man was sent flying by Bloodquencher as well, slamming heavily into Hu Meng's chest. The sound of bones cracking could be heard. A 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator was severely injured. Not only that, the momentum of Bloodquencher was not over yet, and it continued to strike Chai Li's spirit saber. Clang! Chai Li's expression changed starkly as the web between his thumb and index finger split open, dripping with blood as his spirit saber slipped out of his hands. Tapping his feet gently, Chai Li made use of the momentum to float backwards and escape 100 feet away. His face was pale and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his lips. Of the 2 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators, one was severely injured and the other fled in defeat. That was how terrifying the might of that slash was. When Glass Palace's Pei Chunyu and malevolent earth sex fiend heir, Shui Yang, arrived with the crowd, they caught sight of that and their pupils constricted with shock. Even the two of them might not be able to escape unscathed if they were the ones receiving that slash. The rest of the cultivators gasped with their eyes and mouths agape. Chai Li did not dare to linger any longer. If Hu Meng had not defended against the first slash, that slash would have been enough to rip his organs apart. Chai Li fled out of the city without even turning back. His eyes were filled with endless hatred as he shrieked, "Su Zimo, I'll repay today's grudge 100 times over." Chai Li was absolutely confident that he could escape Xiantian City. He made use of the power of Su Zimo's slash to widen the distance between them. Both of them were spent and there was no way Su Zimo could catch up to him. Ha 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 ha. Right then, Su Zimo's laughter sounded. Chai Li suddenly felt his heart skip a beat. He subconsciously turned his head to look, and a dense cold light rushed towards him at an extremely fast speed, arriving in the blink of an eye. Through the cold light, Chai Li caught sight of a figure in the distance. Bloodquencher was stabbed into the ground beside him, and he wielded a white bow that had just retracted. Su Zimo's voice sounded. "I've said it before. The 4 mounted bandits will be removed from the list today." Poof! 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 Chai Li's body was pierced through by 10 arrows, turning him into a sieve. He powerlessly fell to the end of the long street, devoid of any signs of life. At the same time, Su Zimo put away his moon concealment bow and arrived beside Hu Meng with Bloodquencher. Hu Meng laid in the mud, coughing out blood that was quickly washed away by the rain, and his gaze was unfocused. Su Zimo looked down with a cold gaze. The next moment a saber beam flashed. A gigantic head rolled down. The 4 mounted bandits were buried in Xiantian City. Chapter 377. The outcome of that battle was beyond everyone's expectations. In less than 15 minutes, the 3 mounted bandits who returned to the city were dead and their blood stained the long street. Among them were 2 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. That final thunderous slash was an eye-opener for many cultivators, causing them to feel an unparalleled visual impact that shook their hearts. Countless gazes landed on the bloodied figure standing on the long street with a saber in hand. Their gazes were conflicted. There was shock, fear, admiration and judgment. Everyone realized that from this day forth, there would definitely be a place for that person in Xiantian City. His name would be spread through this battle. Elixir Yang sect disciples did not expect that to happen as well. Initially, Tang Yu was waiting for the agreed time to arrive so that she could lead the cultivators under her to charge forward and save Su Zimo and the others. Who would have thought that the situation would change so drastically in the blink of an eye? 2 mounted bandits were dead. This, even with Uncle Liang's temperament and experience, he was stunned on the spot. A 5 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator managed to kill 2 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators on the spot despite being 2 cultivation realms above him. It was not that Uncle Liang had never seen such paragons before. However, they were all from the top factions of Tianhuang mainland and were extremely rare. What was the background of this Su Zimo before him? He did not even have a sect badge. He was definitely not a legacy disciple of those super sections. Furthermore, Su Zimo did not have any traces of the legacy cultivation techniques of those super sects and factions. For super sects such as the 9 immortal sects, 7 fiend sects and 6 Buddhist monasteries, every single one of them had their own cultivation techniques and secret skills that were not taught to outsiders. In a life and death battle they would definitely release them and it was easy to identify them. However, Su Zimo's capabilities, his pair of spirit wings were indeed extraordinary and his sword formation was stunning as well. However, that was not the reason why he was able to kill those above his cultivation realm. The reason why he was able to kill those above his cultivation realm was because of his frightening physique that was close to that of a pure-blooded ferocious beast. In Tianhuang mainland, there were not many sects that specialized in body tempering among the immortal. Buddhist and fiend sects, and Glass Palace was one of them. However, it was clear that this person had nothing to do with those body tempering sections. Could it be that other than these top forces, there were other hidden sects or hidden experts who could cultivate such terrifying geniuses? How could a cultivation method that could cultivate such a physique be unknown? For the first time, Uncle Liang felt that he couldn't see through Su Zimo. Right then, a look of determination flashed through Tang Yu's eyes as she raised her arm and shouted, "Elixir Yang sect, listen up. Follow me and kill the remnants of the 4 mounted bandits. Leave no one alive." Before she finished speaking, Tang Yu charged forward for the first time. She summoned her flying sword and joined the battle. Uncle Liang didn't have time to think and hurriedly followed. Behind him, more than 1,000 Elixir Yang sect cultivators also rushed forward and killed the remaining desperados. Although these desperados did not fear death, the death of Chai Li and Hu Meng was still a huge blow to their minds. Coupled with the fact that they had just gone through a huge battle, they had expended a lot of energy. When the vigorous cultivators of the Dan Yang sect charged over, they were instantly scattered. Some of the desperados broke down mentally and yelled as they fled out of the city. However, they were killed on the spot before they could take more than a few steps. On one side, it was a heavily injured and exhausted army. On the other side, it was a ferocious army with a ferocious aura. It was clear who was superior. The outcome of this battle was already decided. With the death of 2 7 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators, Elixir Yang sect's greatest concern was no longer present. On the long street, Ji Chengtian, Little Fatty and Shijian fell to the ground and laughed out loud without a care for their image. Their laughter affected the wounds on their bodies, causing the 3 of them to suck in a breath of cold air. However, the 3 of them continued to laugh. With Xiaoning's support, Lung Ro could barely stand. At that moment a rare smile appeared on Lung Ro's face as well. It was extremely alluring. "We survived." Shijian scratched his head and looked at Ji Chengtian and Little Fatty in disbelief, grinning foolishly. "That's right." Ji Chengtian heaved a long sigh of relief and lamented, "We survived. It feels King great to be alive." Little Fatty cursed and beamed. When the 4 of them returned to Xintian City, they had already disregarded their lives and did not think that they could survive. Right now they were enjoying the joy of surviving a calamity, and every single breath they took was incomparably blissful. After this battle, the friendship between the 4 of them was completely different from before. This was a friendship forged through life and death and the baptism of blood. It was extremely precious in the cultivation world. When he saw that, Su Zimo smiled faintly and a warm current flowed through his heart for a long time. Unknowingly, the rain had stopped. The storm came and went quickly. The dark clouds dispersed and sunlight shone on the long street and the faces of the 5 of them in a dazzling manner. It wasn't just Su Zimo. After today, the names of the other 4 would spread through Xintian City as well. Following Elixir Yang sect's attack, the other major factions joined the battle as well. Chiguramon, Puppet sect and cultivators from other sects and factions wanted a share of the loot. Right then, a black-robed cultivator walked over slowly with a bone spear in his hands. There were faint streaks of blood on the spear in a horrifying manner. Arriving before Su Zimo, the black-robed cultivator stood still. The actions of the black-robed cultivator attracted countless gazes. "It's him, the fiend heir of malevolent Earth sect. What is he trying to do? I don't know, he doesn't seem friendly." Ji Chengtian and the others retracted their smiles with grim expressions. They could sense an intense aura of danger from the black-robed cultivator. This person was extremely strong. In fact, a thought flashed through their minds. Even if they were in their peak condition, they would not be a match for this person even if they joined forces. The black-robed cultivator glared at Su Zimo for a moment without saying anything. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged. "Very good," the black-robed cultivator nodded and declared proudly, I'm Shui Yang, the fiend heir of Malevolent Earth Sect. You're not bad. I'll give you a chance to join Malevolent Earth Sect and become my personal guard. Ji Chengtian and the others were shocked. One of the 7 fiend sects, Malevolent Earth Sect. That was one of the top factions in Tianhuang mainland. However, it belonged to the fiend sects and was different from theirs. Furthermore, the fiend heir of Malevolent Earth Sect was arrogant and his tone was forceful with a condescending attitude. It was truly unpleasant. Ji Chengtian and the others looked at Su Zimo nervously. Given their understanding of Su Zimo, there was a high chance that he would reject the fiend heir of Malevolent Earth Sect. Given the Malevolent Earth Sect heir's personality and methods, he would definitely be filled with killing intent and attack Su Zimo the moment he was rejected. Su Zimo had just fought a huge battle and was at his weakest right now. How could he be a match for the fiend heir of Malevolent Earth Sect? Could it be that after surviving a fierce battle of life and death, he would have to face another calamity? True enough. Su Zimo smirked. What's Malevolent Earth Sect? I've never heard of it. The fiend heir of Malevolent Earth Sect? What's so great about that? When they heard that, the surrounding cultivators were in an uproar. Many cultivators looked at Su Zimo as though they were looking at a dead man. In reality, Su Zimo was not spouting nonsense. Back then, a fiend heir of Malevolent Earth Sect died in his hands. In the fiend sects, there could only be one fiend heir per cultivation realm. Therefore, if Su Zimo had not killed the fiend heir of Malevolent Earth Sect back then, Shui Yang would not have been ranked. Chapter 378. Shui Yang's expression darkened instantly as he narrowed his eyes. The bone spear in his hands trembled slightly as though it was alive, emitting a shuddering malevolent aura. Right then a soft chuckle sounded from not far away. Shui Yang, you're so impressive. A man in luxurious robes strode over. He was as beautiful as jade and his black hair was tied up without a single strand of mess. His eyes were clear as water, and there were no flaws on him at all. When he saw that person, Shui Yang's expression was unchanged. However, there was a hint of wariness in the depths of his eyes. Someone from Glass Palace. I think that's the legacy disciple of Glass Palace, Pei Chunyu. So it's him. I heard that he's at the peak of 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment and is only a step away from 8 Meridian Foundation Establishment. He's just waiting to fight for the Meridian Unlocking Elixir in the Elixir Pool Sect ruins. A commotion broke out from the crowd. Pei Chunyu arrived in front of Su Zimo and nodded towards him with a friendly smile before turning to Shui Yang. Shui Yang, you're making things difficult for fellow Taoist Su Zimo. That's equivalent to making Glass Palace your enemy. Fufu. Shui Yang scoffed coldly and asked instead, since when did that lad have anything to do with Glass Palace? If he's really related to Glass Palace, would you have allowed the 4 mounted bandits to surround him and only appear now? No matter what, you're from the Fiend sects and I'm from the Immortal sections. Pei Chunyu replied coldly, Shui Yang, don't waste your effort. Fellow Taoist Su is righteous and will definitely not be with someone from the Fiend sections. In the blink of an eye, the 2 top cultivators of Xintian City were at odds over Su Zimo. Both factions are starting to rope in Su Zimo after making a name for themselves in that battle. Yes, that man's potential is immeasurable for him to be able to kill 2 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment cultivators. He'll definitely be of great use to either faction in the future. Given that man's potential, he might even be able to leave the ancient battlefield with Pei Chunyu and join Glass Palace eventually. Many cultivators looked at Su Zimo with admiration. Su Zimo's expression didn't change. He suddenly said, you 2 can leave. There's no need to waste your breath here. I won't join either of you. As soon as he finished speaking, the atmosphere instantly dropped to the freezing point. The originally noisy discussions also gradually died down. Everyone's gazes fell on Su Zimo. Some were stunned, some were surprised, and some were puzzled. Such an opportunity was hard to come by, and if it was anyone else, they would gladly accept it. Who would have thought that this person would actually refuse the invitation of the 2 great powers in front of everyone? Moreover, Su Zimo's tone was not polite at all. He even expressed some impatience and disgust. Isn't this person too arrogant? Fufu. Do you think that you can lord over the city just because you killed 2 7 Meridian Foundation Establishment cultivators? This is called acting recklessly. Offending two major powers at once. I'd like to see what kind of fate this person will have. In reality, among everyone present, Ji Chengtian and the others were probably the only ones who could understand Su Zimo's intentions. Firstly, Su Zimo had an agreement with Elixir Yang sect. Secondly, be it Malevolent Earth sect or Glass Palace, they had never thought of paying anything and merely wanted to recruit Su Zimo. At that moment, the cultivators of Elixir Yang sect were still trying their best to kill the remnants of the 4 mounted bandits. As for the 2 factions, they did not want to lose a single soldier and wanted to recruit Su Zimo. Most importantly, Ji Chengtian and the others could not see any bit of sincerity from Pei Chunyu and Shui Yang. Even though Pei Chunyu was polite, there was a condescending arrogance in his tone. Deep down, he looked down on Su Zimo. Rather than calling it an invitation, it would be more accurate to call it a form of charity. If Ji Chengtian and the others could sense it, Su Zimo was even clearer. Therefore, Su Zimo rejected without hesitation. Fufu, ha ha ha. Suddenly, Shui Yang laughed and looked at Pei Chunyu mockingly, saying leisurely, after saying so much, it's just someone's wishful thinking. Interesting. A dark look flashed through the depths of Pei Chunyu's eyes. Su Zimo's words were equivalent to humiliating him in front of everyone. As a legacy disciple of Glass Palace, what was Su Zimo's status and identity? Coupled with Shui Yang's fanning of the flames, Pei Chunyu was already filled with killing intent. Expressionlessly, Pei Chunyu maintained his smile and asked gently once more. Fellow Taoist Su, I didn't hear you clearly earlier on. Can you repeat yourself? Even though Pei Chunyu was smiling and his voice was rather gentle, Ji Chengtian and the others felt their scalps tingle and goosebumps rise all over their bodies. In other words, he was giving Su Zimo another chance. If Su Zimo could not grasp this opportunity, he would kill him. Pei Chunyu had the qualifications and strength to do so. Ji Chengtian and the others looked anxious, hoping that Su Zimo could endure for the time being, and not offend 2 top factions for the sake of injustice. In everyone's opinion, Su Zimo was at his weakest after a fierce battle and was covered in injuries. Even if Su Zimo was in his peak condition, he might not be a match for Pei Chunyu. How could a legacy disciple of Glass Palace, one of the immortal sects, be compared to someone like the 4 mounted bandits? Ji Chengtian and the others looked at Su Zimo nervously. All of a sudden, Su Zimo smiled. Didn't hear me clearly? I'll make it short and repeat myself. Pausing for a moment, Su Zimo opened his mouth gently and spat out a single word. It was earth-shattering. Get lost. As soon as he finished speaking, the surroundings were completely silent. Not a single sound could be heard. Many cultivators' mouths were agape as they stared at the blood-soaked figure in shock. There was only one word left in their minds: lunatic. For some reason, Ji Chengtian and the others relaxed instead and felt relieved. That was Su Zimo. If there was injustice in his heart, he would get rid of it. It was as Su Zimo had said back then, I cultivate not to endure silently, but to have a clear mind and settle grudges as I please. Pei Chunyu's killing intent naturally could not escape Su Zimo's spirit perception. Since that was the case, Su Zimo was even more displeased. The only reason why Su Zimo dared to challenge Pei Chunyu was because of his demon form. Su Zimo would not release that trump card until the very last moment. Otherwise, Su Zimo would have already taken action the moment Pei Chunyu had the intention to kill him, and would not have said so much to the latter. Pei Chunyu froze for a moment. It was clear that he had not expected Su Zimo to have such a reaction. Or rather, Su Zimo dared to have such a reaction. Fufufu. Pei Chunyu laughed. His voice was deep and there was a metallic sound in his laughter that was extremely ear-piercing. A moment later, Pei Chunyu retracted his smile and his palms that were initially behind his back drooped naturally, shrouded in a layer of jade-like light that was crystal clear. You have great potential and I admire that as well. However, Pei Chunyu's gaze was cold as he changed the topic. Since I can't use you, I'll destroy you. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.